what's going on? Welcome to Cleave to Antiquity. My name is Ben, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Anthony Westgate. What's going on, man? Good.
Yo, what's up, guys? Hello, thank you for having me on, Cleve. Great to be here. Yeah, it's I've been watching your streams lately, and good stuff. I'm honored to be in the mix here because I know you've got a lot of really important people on the show that I would say are much more important than whatever I have to say here. Definitely check out the priest and everything that you have on. It's yeah, it's good stuff though.
Well, sometimes it's good to take a break from that and go into some of these kind of more esoteric, secret history type subjects. I also like to do geopolitics, so if you ever wanted to do a stream on that later, that would be interesting too. But I appreciate you coming on the show, man. This will be interesting. So I know you wrote a really interesting Substack article on kind of the esoteric roots of the Protestant Reformation, and a couple of other people have covered this on their show. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. But for everybody in the audience, do me a favor. Go ahead and go to Twitter, retweet the We're Going Live post, so that way we can get some people in the audience here. Like and share. Let's pump up the views. I want to get some people in the audience, and then if you want to ask questions later in the stream, feel free to send them in, and we'll try to address them as best we can. Try to keep them on topic though. Don't like ask us what our favorite color is and things like that. So you want to just introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can kind of just dive into it, man.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I'm a former Protestant, evangelical. I grew up in various charismatic movements. So largely why I kind of ended up where I am now, studying a lot of esoteric stuff as it pertains to Western theology, Western philosophy, and because there was a lot of wild stuff I experienced in the charismatic churches I was in, as you can imagine, that left a lot of questions for me that went unanswered until I became Orthodox. So yeah, I mean, I won't do my whole conversion story. I don't think it's particularly unique. Pretty much what I usually hear from people, the spiritual awakening during COVID and all that stuff, kind of researching what my beliefs were, because I was, last I left off in Christianity, I was Reformed. I was going down the Reformed pipeline, the based PCA and all that, so yeah, I have a, background in Protestant theology, bachelor's degree for what it's worth. That was really a huge part of my conversion process, actually, was like unlearning all of the theology that I had learned in university. So yeah, and so I've just been covering these subjects for about 3 years now, over on Substack primarily. Just started on YouTube over the summer, and just continuing my kind of bizarre esoteric studies here.
Yeah, I noticed. So I've been following you on X for a little bit now, and you seem to have some pretty interesting posts on topics that other people don't really discuss too much. Diving into, I know you've posted about Masonry, you've posted about Kabbalism, you've posted about basically geopolitics, a wide range of things kind of fit within your niche that I think a lot of people aren't really covering super in depth. I mean, there are people out there that are doing it, but your X page is an interesting follow. So I appreciate you swinging by the show to do this type of discussion. Now, as far as Protestantism goes, and esoterica and things like this, I'm very familiar with Freemasonic ties within the Protestant traditions and their role in their formation, especially in the Americas. But we're going to dive into Kabbalism and things like this. So why don't you just kind of lay out a little bit of backdrop for us, and then we can dive into this subject.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an extremely broad topic, and it all depends where you want to start. So the starting point for me, and for a majority, I would say even it's almost unanimously agreed upon, that in terms of Western Christianity, where you can definitively trace Western esoteric origins is through the Renaissance Church of Rome in the late 15th century. A large part of the entry of Kabbalah into the West had to do with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. So with them, they brought all of their texts, and then you had the catalyst of print technology on the horizon, or already kind of in effect at that point. And then you had the emerging Protestant Reformation. So a lot of it just kind of culminated at the same time into, and there was a lot of eschatological expectations at the time because of, you had on the Christian side, there was the fall of Constantinople, which occurred, something like 50 years ago. So within the century. And then the expulsion of the Jews. So then they developed a whole kind of expectation of the end times of their messianic age. Kabbalah is deeply eschatological on top of being esoteric. But I guess, when you bring up this subject, a lot of people understandably will think it's ridiculous or absurd, or it's a stretch or something. And yeah, I understand that. But the fact is, you can look at how it came through Rome, through, the two primary figures that are always named are Giovanni Pico della Mirandola and Johannes Reuchlin. Mm-hmm. And these were Catholic humanists who they were driven by this whole motive called Prisca Theologia, which was this recovery of ancient wisdom. And so they operated their syncretism on this entire premise where it was assumed to be a recovery of the most ancient knowledge. And therefore, if it was the most ancient, it was the most true, right? And so They used this to kind of validate Christianity. And so, first it was Neoplatonic Hermeticism that came in. And then Pico discovered Kabbalah after studying with various rabbis, conversos, as they call them, converts to Jewish converts to Catholicism, and developed what's called Christian Kabbalah. This was based on, the assumption, again, all of this is like, this could in great length be refuted, which I've gone through the effort of doing, but how he was using the Zohar, which was written in the 13th century. They didn't know this at the time. We found out later with modern scholarship, the dating, but it was, presumed to be like a first century mystical text, or dating back even further to the time of Moses. It was all, they believe, was orally transmitted through this unbroken chain. And so he was fascinated with the assumption that it was pointing to all of these Christian truths, like the Trinity and the divinity of, I think it was one of them was the divinity of Christ, if I'm not mistaken. But they found that, sorry, something's playing in the background here. Sorry. Basically what they found was that the Zohar was written at a time under persecution, Christian persecution. And they wrote, the author of the Zohar purposely wrote in all of these Christian themes to kind of develop a counter mythology to Christianity. So what the Renaissance humanists thought that they discovered was purposely put in there. That's a whole other subject, how the Zohar is like this anti-Christian polemic. But
yeah, why don't you take a step back, because some of these subjects are a little new to the audience. Why don't you explain the Zohar? Exactly what that is and its significance.
I have a tendency to assume that people know what all this crazy stuff I'm talking about. The Zohar is the primary text of Kabbalah. People kind of assume that Kabbalah is like just one book or something. I would say the two primary texts of Kabbalah are the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah. The Zohar is a mystical commentary on the Torah. So it's almost entirely metaphysical. So it's just explaining these, very Gnostic metaphysics. And and so it's like this is where, like, I'm sure everyone's seen the diagram like you have on your thumbnail of the Sephiroth. They call it the tree of life. Right. And so those are all of these, it's 10 emanations, they call it, that are, they emanate from the Ein Sof, which is the God of Kabbalah. There are some interesting parallels with with Orthodox theology. Like, they believe that the Ein Sof is, there's like a paradoxical nature to the Ein Sof, where it's transcendent but also immanent. So, we don't have a problem describing God that way. But, it breaks down because, and this is where, actually, interestingly, a lot of Roman Catholics will criticize the essence energies distinction as deriving from Kabbalah or, Neoplatonism, because it has, they just kind of conflate it with emanationism, which is very distinct. So, like, in Kabbalah, instead of the essence energies distinction, it's that God's emanations are actually part of his essence. So there's this whole thing where, like, the creation story is wild. Like, the Ein Sof, when during the creation of the universe, of the cosmos, all this divine light permeated these vessels of creation, as they call them. These are all kind of like allegorical descriptions of what's going on metaphysically, but the vessels couldn't hold the light of creation, and they shattered. So it was like this inevitable accident that happened during creation. This primordial chaos was created as a result, and that's the origin of evil. So the origin of evil is within the Ein Sof, and so the whole thing is dialectical. It's all about, like, maintaining this dialectical balance between good and evil, and so. Yeah, so that's kind of like, without getting too in the weeds with it, that's within the Zohar. The Sefer Yetzirah is another mystical creation narrative. So that stands for the book of creation. The Sefer Zohar is the book of splendor, the book of radiance, they call it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, again, these are not that ancient. These are the Zohar, at least, it was written in the medieval period. So
yeah, what's interesting about this particular subject is we had planned to do this a little while ago. I don't remember how long we messaged about doing this show, but Kabbalah has actually come back into pop culture through the Epstein files, because some of the subjects and topics that he was bringing up in these emails actually touch on the subject of Kabbalah as his kind of metaphysical framework, which is interesting to see this kind of continuity, these subversive groups adopting, or rather this metaphysical framework leading towards either the creation or perpetuation of these subversive groups. And ultimately, I mean, that's what I would classify the Protestant Reformation as. It's almost a less subtle attempt at subversion. You know what I mean? We see this also with other esoteric groups like the Masons, right? I mean, if you've ever read the Alta Vendita, that would be an interesting kind of subject, but that would go into another tangent. So let's refocus the discussion here. So let's get into the Protestant Reformation and how it has ties to kabbalistic thought, because I think that'll be an interesting kind of segue there.
Well, so it's a little bit. There's what appears to be a little bit of a gap between the Renaissance and at least the early Reformation, at least the magisterial reformers, I would say. So, to just frame this totally fair, because I know that, like, everyone probably the primary interest in this is like, oh, well, I want to know, like, what was, was Luther a crypto kabbalist, or was he, some kind of Rosicrucian or something like that? And the fact is, Luther in particular was aggressively opposed to Jewish mysticism. He wrote quite a bit about it. And that, in my opinion, is a testament to just how prominent it was even in Germany during the time of the Reformation, was that he was writing against it. And also he famously wrote in his commentary to the Galatians that I think he's referring to sola scriptura, and he calls it this. He says something like, "This is the true Kabbalah." So like there is presupposing that his readers even knew what that was at the time. So that I think says a lot to how popular it was.
Yes.
So what I'm saying, like when we talk about this subject, is not that the magisterial reformers were interested in Kabbalah. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. So, and then it becomes not so nuanced. I would say by the late 16th century, it becomes very much syncretic. And we can go into that a little bit, because second generation Lutherans, and even during the time of Luther, they started to become very, like, especially with the radical reformers, they started to really, they thought that Luther didn't go far enough, and they really started to do more of like what the Renaissance humanists were doing, and syncretizing various esoteric traditions, particularly alchemy. Alchemy has a lot of parallels to Kabbalah. So then once Kabbalah did gain more prominence, especially with Isaac Luria's popular reinterpretation that, this is basically the Kabbalah everyone knows now. It was reinterpreted by Isaac Luria in the 15th century. It started really spreading in the early 17th century. So at that point, a lot of these Protestants, at least the more like esoterically inclined sects, started to adopt Kabbalah, and that's where you have the emergence of the Rosicrucians that later become Freemasons, and then you kind of like follow the transmission a little bit easier in the 16th, 17th century. But as far as the Reformation, what I found in my research was that the transmission was more structural, and so that came in the form of the thriving environment of Hebrew learning that made the Reformation possible. And so there's a great book called I think it's titled, these are all like these really generic titles, but it's written by a Jewish historian named Heinrich Graetz, and it's called The Influence of Judaism on the Protestant Reformation. And most of the book is about this event that occurred just prior to the Reformation that kind of paved it, like it was the forerunner of the Reformation. And it was a dispute between Johannes Reuchlin, who was the successor to Pico della Mirandola. He was I would say, like, he systematized Christian Kabbalah, and he was a Catholic humanist. And it was a battle between him and this converso named Johannes Pfefferkorn, who was like on a rampage to expose all these blasphemous teachings that are in the religious books of the Jews, the Talmud and the Zohar. And so he was doing all these book burnings. He was advocating for confiscating the books. I won't get into all the details about this, but basically, Reuchlin gained the favor of Emperor Maximilian in this investigation that was launched into the Jewish books to determine, like, were these were these truly blasphemous? Can we allow the publishing and dissemination of these texts? And they determined that it was okay. And so a lot of these historians that cover this, there's a shared sentiment that this was what provided the groundwork that made the Reformation possible, because it was so dependent on, like, when they kind of like opened up the scholarship with sola scriptura and having to make all these translations into German from the Old Testament, it required Hebrew scholarship. But then there was a kind of odd, like, dialectic that emerged because of that, because so many of them were opposed to learning from rabbis,
Right.
like Luther.
Yeah.
And so they took on this approach, like Luther wrote a great deal about this. Like, he said that the Kabbalists were worse than rabbis. He like said all this stuff about, like, I would never like learn from rabbis or whatever. And so what do? You have to learn Hebrew, though. You have to learn Hebrew to translate the Old Testament. Who are you going to learn it from? The only people that knew it were rabbis. So it created this odd. So that's why I kind of refer to Luther as like a paradoxical figure in that sense, because he couldn't avoid that paradox. He could oppose it all he wanted, but he required Hebrew scholarship. So he ended up spending a great deal of money staffing Hebraists to, and many of them were conversos, to do this translation work. Many of them were using Reuchlin's Hebrew books to do the translation work. They were using the Bomberg Talmud, the Bomberg Bible, the Bomberg Rabbinical Bible. Bomberg was that's a whole other rabbit hole. He was the kind of like the most influential early printer that the Vatican was actually funding, and he was the foremost publisher of the Talmud and the Zohar at the time, and Rome was funding his whole print shop. So
Interesting.
Yeah, the Pope gave him a monopoly to print all these Hebrew books and stuff. So, at the time, like, what happened was, because of that, all these Protestant Hebrew learning centers where they were doing all this translation work, they doubled as publishing centers for Hebrew literature.
Oh, you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Did I cut out?
Yeah, it just got quiet.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, I don't know if it caught it, but I was saying, what happened was, as a result, all of these Protestant Hebrew learning centers where they were doing all this translation work, they doubled as printers, as print centers. So they were also disseminating all this Hebrew literature throughout Europe from there.
Mm-hmm. Through the Roman print shop that they had given them access to. Is that what you're saying?
That was one of them. Yeah, that was one. I mean, there were many print centers at the time, but the Bomberg's was kind of the one that was the center for at least for the Vatican.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd heard that the Roman Catholic Church was partly at fault for disseminating the Talmud around the world, basically. By giving them so much access to print this text.
Yep.
But what's interesting, just to kind of backtrack, talking about the subject of Luther and this kind of dialectic between, one, his strong distrust of rabbis, his strong distrust of Jews, is his dislike of Kabbalism. Two, immediately about a generation or two afterwards, this massive swing in the opposite direction of his followers. And also within Luther's life, you can kind of see this same pattern as well. And I think this, if you were to look at the Protestant Reformation and its beginning as kind of the foundation for what is going to happen today, I think it's very evident that the turbulence that was experienced at the very beginning only expanded as time continued on. And now we have all of this variation of different ideas, axioms, thought, teaching, esoteric backgrounds in these various different denominations, so on and so forth. But we see this within Luther's own life as well. With his his teachings on marriage, his blessing of the bigamous marriage of Hess, Philip of Hess.
Mhm.
We see, I mean, just his whole life is just a big, like crazy, contradictive train wreck.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even like for my studies in this particular subject. I'm not even getting into his personal life, honestly, because like I don't think. And then the other part to this is like I guess alluded to this earlier, but everyone in their interest in this subject, they want to know about Luther. They're looking for the smoking gun on Luther. Um, and so I don't even really think that he's particularly important to this whole transmission.
Right.
He certainly contributed as much as he did by through his success of the Reformation, but there was a lot of other factors that contributed. Of course, you had the
Yeah.
the catalyst of print technology. You had, like I said, the prior to the Reformation, it allowed for the dissemination of Hebrew studies, and then that brought in a lot of cross pollination of Jews with Christians, kind of collaborating together in scholastic studies
Right.
and whatnot. So, yeah, it kind of was unavoidable, but that's kind of like, if I'm being totally honest about this, it's like there does seem to be that gap in at least direct transmission.
Sure.
So it's not that like the Renaissance Christian Kabbalists like handed on this tradition to the magisterial reformers, and then it went on from there. There is a bit of a gap, but so what I'm arguing is that gap was it's not as much of a gap. It's more of just like a structural transmission. The Protestant Reformation created the architecture basically for this transmission to really start definitively, literally about a generation after. And if you wanted to get into like the alchemy stuff, that's where it gets really interesting, because that's where it actually starts to shape Protestant theology. I couldn't really, like, without kind of stretching and speculating, draw any parallels to at least Luther's theology.
That's the whole point that I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Was that despite the best of his wishes, his movement went completely off the rails 1 generation later.
Yeah. Well, there was one thing actually. So Luther, in recent scholarship, they found that Luther was more of a mystic than we previously thought of him as, and so it's pretty interesting because like he totally rejected Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, who is an important figure not only in Eastern Orthodox mysticism, but also he happens to be very important in Western esotericism. A lot of these esoteric traditions refer back to they call him pseudo Dionysius. We know that he's a real first century figure, but so he rejected the apophatic theology and but he kind of, like, again, very paradoxically developed this what he called word mysticism. I don't know if he called it exactly that, but like this is what the scholars call it. It was called word mysticism. And so this involved, it's like similar to what Reuchlin was doing. Reuchlin developed what was called the wonder working word, which involved, this is where it gets all kabbalistic. So it's all like using these cryptic like codes, like within the Hebrew letters themselves to spell the divine name. And so what he did was he inserted a letter S in Hebrew into the tetragrammaton, and so that it spelled Yeshua instead of Yahweh. And he saw this as it had like magical properties, like you could actually invoke miracles by doing this. And so you see a little bit of that. I mean, Luther did he did give a nod to Reuchlin. He wrote him letters and he commended him. He was to some degree influenced by his work, maybe not so much the Kabbalistic stuff, but it's like this stuff got all really infused into the theology. And it was like, I think for a lot of these guys, hard to discern where the Kabbalah influence got in, because a lot of it is very subtle. But anyway, Luther had this idea of like this word mysticism that I find very interesting. So, not to like go off too much about this, but I think you might find this interesting too. I'm particularly interested in how the notion of the Word of God was previously, prior to the Reformation, it was, predominantly referring to the Logos, to the incarnate Christ.
Mhm.
When the church fathers, when theologians prior to the Reformation referred to the Word of God, they were typically referring to Christ as the Word, the Logos. That's not to say they didn't also consider the Scriptures the Word of God, but it's just that there was that kind of like it was more dominantly used to describe Christ. And then the Reformation comes along, and that kind of shifts, right? The emphasis is placed on the text being the Word of God. And then you have Reuchlin kind of as the bridge, where it's like the wonder working word. Now the text itself has these mystical properties, right? And so with Luther's word mysticism, it's all very like internal and stuff. So like I'll just take a break here just in case I'm overwhelming everyone. But yeah, this is where there is some mystical influence of Luther. I have a few books on it actually, and it's a kind of a newer development in Reformation historians. So they found that he's more mystical than he led on to for us to think.
Yeah. Do you have so I feel like this might do good in this type of format. Do you have any resources we could share up on the screen as we're diving through this information?
Yeah.
Like
Any
maybe your
particular?
Substack, like maybe your Substack.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you could pull up the Substack article. I can.
Well, I figure if you want to present it, you can. Do you know how to use StreamYard? Go into
Yeah.
the
Oh yeah,
project and
yeah.
then
Okay, I got you.
share that. Just that way people can kind of follow along with you, because people are
Sure.
saying like, I'm into it, I'm on board, but where can we verify? So that's what they want. They want to be able to see it
All
as
right.
well. So that would be cool.
Well, if anyone wants sources on a particular thing that I'm mentioning, please say so, and I will provide at least one or two sources to verify anything I'm saying. I'm not pulling this out of thin air. I've been researching this extensively for the past 3 years, so I'd be happy to provide any scholarly resources too. I'll pull up this article here.
Yeah, it sounds good. We can pull up this. I know not everything is covered in the Substack, but we can
Yeah,
kind of use it as a reference point
yeah,
for when we get into subjects that are applicable here. Here, I'm going to dive into some super chats and then we'll
yeah.
continue with the discussion. Cool, dude. Good to see you. Cleave to the Westgate as we're soaring to Dyersville. Great guest. Very interesting videos. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Marilyn, $5 with the crown. Thank you for supporting the show. I appreciate it. Help us reach the super chat goal. If you like this type of content, send in a super chat. If you want to ask questions, send in a super chat. We'll pull your question up on the screen as well. Texas Nevsky, good to see you. Jesus Christ is God and he is in our midst. Absolutely. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate you. Iron Giant, $20 super chat. The big one. Thank you so much. Could you interview Father Christopher Foley? He's part of the band Luxury that has 2 other Orthodox priests in it. He's done interviews in the past with Jonathan Pajot, currently inquiring at his parish, so I'm biased. I feel like his name has come up before. Send me an email. If there's anything interesting you think we could discuss, send me an email and we could talk about maybe bringing him on. I just got to have some kind of angle to discuss, or some kind of talk that people would find interesting. Because I do the priest Q&As, but just doing a general Q&A is starting to become boring for me. So like, I'd rather have like an hour of discussion and then break it down into a Q&A if I'm going to do that type of show. You know what I mean? I feel like that's more fun. I will have some very interesting guests this month and next month. I'm actually going to have I don't know if I want to spoil it, but we'll have some more hierarchs on the show, so that'll be interesting. All right, Anthony.
And then here I am doing all this crazy stuff,
No, it's
sandwich it in
awesome.
between.
That's awesome. Well, let's be real. I'm doing like Catholic news segments, Roman Catholic news segments.
Hey, I've had, believe it or not, I've had quite a few priests actually reach out to me. I'm not going to name them, obviously, but they've reached out to me privately, thanking me for covering this. I didn't quite understand why it would be useful to people until after I published it. People started telling me, but and like my whole thing, kind of partly what led me down this path into this particular research was like, what I'm hearing from the feedback I'm hearing from people that are reading it now is like, they're saying, I always suspected there was something going on. When you look at even modern Protestantism, and I know I'm speaking broadly here. So let's say, at least like the more notably kind of occultic movements within Protestantism, people will always say like, oh, I always suspected something was going on there.
Well, you can kind of trace this Judaic influence on the Protestant Reformation, even from the scriptures they use, from the versions, the translations that they use. And it's directly, even linguistically, influenced more by later Hebrew editions than the earlier Greek ones. And the assumption was that since it was in the Hebrew, these would actually be earlier, more reliable manuscripts. But these are actually later editions. So even diving into the text, you can tell there was a massive Judaic influence on the Protestant Reformation.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to mention that when I was talking about the foundation of Hebrew learning that the Reformation was kind of built on. That's exactly how that came about. The I don't want to say abandoning of the Greek textual tradition of the Septuagint, because they didn't totally abandon it. They still used the Septuagint in their translation work, but they used it to supplement the Masoretic text. So this was another shift that occurred, was that the reformers prioritized the Masoretic rabbinical textual tradition over the Septuagint, the one that has been maintained as the normative textual authority for 1,500 years prior to that, at least within Orthodoxy. The Latins, I think they kind of had more of a balance, but yeah, so that's exactly how that happened. And they were using, again, like the Hebrew text that they were using in those translations were also, had all various degrees of like rabbinic influence on top of that. So, so it does describe that actually.
Well, one thing to note also is that if you go all the way back to the Council of Rome, the Council of Carthage, which were Latin regional councils very early on, some of the figures that were there, I mean, you look at Jerome, he was the person who published the Latin Vulgate. And where was he getting a lot of this information from? He was basically consulting with rabbis, right? He was consulting with these people on these subjects to pull from whatever modern versions of the canon they had. But what's interesting to note that even if you were to look historically at the Latin canon, in the early days, in the time of Rome and Carthage, you do kind of see this two-tiered type of distinction between the deuterocanonical books and the primary books, which is actually abolished later at Trent. So they are a little bit of they do hold to a little bit of an innovation in the canon, as they've elevated all of the books to the same level of authority. It's actually anathema to hold to a different position, according to the Council of Trent. Now, granted, the Council of Florence actually does state the same canon, but it doesn't anathematize holding to an opposing position. And this is actually evident by some of the cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church and their statements shortly after that particular council and just prior to Trent. But after Trent, all of that stopped. So they are a little bit of innovators as far as the canon list itself goes, and the distinctions that are held there. But what's interesting to note, the reason I bring it up in the first place, is just because of the sources that Jerome went to when compiling the canon for the West were rabbis. I mean, it's Hebrew sources,
Yeah, and actually St. Augustine kind of was, I don't know if I don't know if I'd say he condemned him for that, but he was very opposed to it. He wrote against.
Wasn't happy.
Yeah, he wasn't happy. Yeah, he wasn't happy about it.
Neither was Rufinus. And then you have the
Yeah.
which his works aren't even extant. You'd only have the counter arguments from Jerome against Rufinus.
Yeah. So, you know, I guess I'll get into this article here, but you know, it's a little bit like not structured great, and there's some stuff in here that, like this is about the Hussite revolt that, you know, I don't even think is totally relevant, at least to Kabbalah in particular. But I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is because like it's showing how there is this history of like, okay, well, the Hussites were kind of they're known historically as like, I guess the first proto-Protestants, like they were kind of starting this whole proto-Protestant movement. And so I sourced this too. By the way, there's sources for this to show how the Jews were involved with funding the military efforts of the Hussite revolt. So, you know, talk about subversion. It's like they had a lot of incentive to do that. It was all about undermining the Roman Church. So they had a lot of incentive to undermine these revolutionary Protestant movements. So I think that's why I brought this up here. And then I get into a little bit of the Renaissance. I don't give it enough attention. I mean, these were already very long articles, and you know, you're following a 500-year transmission. So I kind of did my best here, but
I have an interesting question for you.
Yeah.
Pickett Hart asks, do you think the obsession with Hebraic numerology and lower church Protestantism has its roots in Kabbalah? Evangelicals are quicker to trust Jewish tradition than the church fathers. You know, I've seen that actually, that there's this modern obsession with being some kind of, what do you call it? Messianic, quote unquote, Messianic Jew. It's like it's like the evangelical subverted version of trying to follow the church fathers, but it's just like it's a fake veneer of we're just going to
yeah, I mean, it's totally Judaized. That is like an undeniably Judaizing heresy. Like a lot of people throw around the term Judaizing, and it becomes like really broad, but like that is like undisputably Judaizing. But yes, there is what I was saying earlier about the Tetragrammaton, what the wonder working word, what Reuchlin did with the letters YHWH, and he inserted the S to make it spell Yehoshua. And there's this great emphasis on like just the mere speaking of that name, invoking like miraculous properties and stuff. And so I suspect, you know, again, this is like in the modern context, it's kind of difficult to like prove definitively that this stuff is Kabbalistic, but like if you know enough about Kabbalah and the fact that it did infiltrate some very influential Protestant movements, then you could probably deduce that, yeah, it does have, you can trace it to that. And so I suspect that's what's going on with this, like, you know, these I don't know what you would call them, evangelicals that are like, they're like, you know, they insist on saying Yeshua, you know, and not Jesus. Like, oh, you must use his Hebrew. Like that gets a little bit into the Kabbalistic territory where it's like emphasizing the, you know, the power in the Hebrew words themselves, or even down to the Hebrew letters. So yes, I would say if there's any kind of like, I didn't even know that that's a thing, that there's low church Protestants in particular using Hebraic numerology, but that is like definitively Kabbalistic. I mean, that's exactly what Kabbalah, especially in the Christian appropriation, was. It involved decoding all these mysteries of scripture within the Hebrew letters.
Right. So one thing that I would point out is that this influence is probably not likely coming from the people who are engaging in quote unquote Messianic Judaism. It would come from the individuals that have kind of funded these movements and propped up these churches, quote unquote churches. I mean, you'll find oftentimes in the evangelical context, it's not just somebody coming along and saying, hey, I have a neat idea, let's start this church up. It's third parties funding groups, funding people to go out with an agenda and to, push something very specific upon a group of people. It's a form of soft power often. And what we find in the messianic, quote unquote, messianic Jewish churches, there's this coordinated push from very prominent Christian Zionist pastors that have large evangelical platforms that will particularly host these individuals, will promote them, will promote their work, will promote their books. They'll get invited to do podcasts on these Christian Zionist platforms. And really what you'll see is this is more of a kind of a geopolitical influence on these particular institutions. And you'll find in my time in the evangelical circles, because I was an evangelical pastor, what I would find is often people would unsuspectingly share things that they don't realize are absolutely, completely insane, abiblical, from these groups, as if it was somehow compatible with even the framework that we were operating off of, which was more of a SBC Baptist type framework. I remember people at a men's group would share like a messianic Jewish rabbi as if he was some kind of good person to learn from, and he was saying the most insane things, like he's basically pushing like neo Seventh-day Adventist doctrine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like abstain from pork and shellfish. You need to be circumcised, like crazy, like just absolute, like the legitimately just spouting the Judaizer heresy. But yeah.
I mean, I'm this study I'm doing, it actually explains the origins of Adventism as well, because they have Masonic origins. So, again, like it in the modern period, it becomes more obscured, and it's harder to link a direct tie to like a kabbalistic influence. It becomes more kind of like passed down secondhand, like through these syncretic systems or institutions that they're operating in. And so Freemasonry is, it's an entirely kabbalistic institution. It's like all the imagery and the metaphysics. It all involves Kabbalah. I mean, even the main thing that people see with Freemasonry, with the Masonic pillars, like that corresponds with the Sephiroth, the image you had on earlier. That's like a whole other discussion. But I mean, it's all, again, this is like very broad. This topic is
kind of conversational, man. No worries at all. I want to pull up one thing real quick on the Judaizer heresy, because some people are unfamiliar. There's somebody kind of spurred.
What was the first heresy? It was the first Christian heresy.
Correct. Absolutely.
I mean, that's what St. Paul's addressing in his letters. He's mostly correcting Judaizing.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of people, especially from an evangelical background, don't understand the context. They don't understand the history. This is one of the earliest heresies that addressed ad nauseum in the early church. Council of Laodicea, one of the first regional councils, actually addresses this at length. But I'll pull up a couple of citations just to kind of walk through some of the basics about this, and then we can move into some other.
Yeah, you want to put it on the screen, or?
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Okay.
Now. All right, so hold on. Let me remove yours, and I'll pull this up. So a couple of different things. Let's see. I think I have Laodicea actually saved in these notes here. But anyway, so yeah, there you go. So it not only applies to believing that circumcision is necessary to salvation, but it also applies to attributing basically any salvific notion to holding to the Old Testament Mosaic law. And this was an issue that many of the early Christians that came from a Jewish background still held on to these kind of precepts, and it was very confusing for them. Normally when a council is held, it's because there's some sort of crisis in the church. So clarification needed to be issued. Many of the church fathers actually talk about this subject. Laodicea, I do have it right here. Laodicea actually issues this edict right here. Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on the day, rather honoring the Lord's day, which would be Sunday. And if they can, resting then as Christians. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema from Christ. This is extremely early on. This is the same exact language that Paul uses in Galatians when he discusses the Judaizers in that text as well, who were saying that you had to be circumcised in order to be a Christian, and that you should abstain from eating with Gentiles and all of these other things. So Judaizing isn't necessarily just limited to that one subset of, oh, it's just talking about circumcision. No, this is talking about attributing salvific necessity to any number of the Mosaic laws. So Seventh-day Adventists would fall under this, so on and so forth. So it is a very broad topic. But anything you want to address on that, Anthony?
No, I mean, other than I would add the quote that, you know, people tend to post around on X from was it Saint Justin Martyr, I believe, who said that Christianity didn't come from Judaism, but Judaism from Christianity. So kind of like alluding to the notion that Judaism is like a post Second Temple religion. And I mean, you know, interestingly, you see all throughout the New Testament, when they're, and especially during St. Paul's missions, often when the Jews come up, you know, in terms of the religion they practice, they're referred to as proselytizers. And it's like, what is that about? Like, why do Jews today proselytize? No, like you don't ever see them recruiting people into Judaism, but you saw that in the first century, numerous times throughout the New Testament. And so that indicates, you know, there was like some kind of like new religion being established there. You know, there's I guess there's two things I could mention here that are somewhat unrelated, but I guess I'll mention this because it relates to the super chat you just got. Another thing I found pretty interesting was do you recall ever hearing even Protestant preachers mentioning the Shekinah glory?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that word Shekinah is not anywhere in the Hebrew Old Testament, that term Shekinah. Mm-hmm. That is a very prominent concept in Jewish mysticism, Shekinah. Now, and that's not to say that the Protestant adoption of it, like what they're getting at, is kabbalistic, because I think that, you know, largely they've kind of reinterpreted it.
Yes.
To describe the you know, the manifestation of God's glory, like in how it appeared in the tabernacle. But this has a deep esoteric significance within Jewish mysticism, and I just find it interesting that like you don't really see the church fathers or any, you know, it's not really like a prominent at all concept within earlier Christian theology. Like you don't see the church fathers talking about Shekinah, right? Right. Now you can say, well, they didn't have Hebrew education, sure. But the fact is, like, this didn't really become prominent until, you know, after the Reformation. A lot of Calvinists, you know, will refer to this. I remember seeing all these clips of R.C. Sproul talking about the Shekinah glory, and he's like describing Ezekiel's chariot, that relates to chariot mysticism. That's the earliest form of Jewish mysticism. It's called Merkaba. It's like involving trying to replicate the vision of Ezekiel with the chariot. And so there is that. I mean, again, could you definitively tie that to Kabbalah? No, unless you knew unless you knew that context, I guess. Like, so. Right.
Well, a lot of these low church evangelical circles do have a lot of weird numerology stuff within their apologetics, within a lot of the sermon content, the stuff that they preach. A lot of this like revelation focus, focusing on the end times, so on and so forth. A lot of this has very similar ties. I'll pull up one kind of funny example of this in a Baptist context. I just shared this clip today on X, but it's kind of, you'll notice some of the symbolism in what he says here. It's funny, but you'll notice.
There were 66 pieces of showbread on the table in the tabernacle, Daddy, and that symbolizes the bread of life, the complete, inspired, inerrant, infallible, indestructible Word of God, the 66th book, King James Bible, amen. That right there, hallelujah.
That is a master Kabbalist there.
That's a KJV supremacist right there. It's that's one of those guys. Unironically, they believe the KJV just fell from the sky. That was God's, chosen translation, and all the others are heretical.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as there is numerology. It's not to say like numerology in itself in the Bible is Kabbalistic. It's like Kabbalistic numerology is very specific to the I would call it letter manipulation more specifically. So it's like imposing this specific type of numerology, and because like within Hebrew, like the numbers, this is like what they call gematria. They correspond with like certain letters, and then they think that those have like hidden meanings and stuff, and so they try to derive all this mystical meaning out of the Hebrew letters themselves. So it's just to be clear, it's not to say that like
Correct.
Any kind of numerology within the Bible is like Kabbalistic or something, but
yeah, well, I think the massive difference would be a typological importance on numerology rather than say these numbers are actually like self-actualizing magic spells. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and to your point, this is a big reason why I cover this is because it all involves eschatology.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the Kabbalah is an eschatological text for the most part. It has an eschatological end goal, which is to restore the shattered vessels, as I was describing earlier, of creation, which is what they call tikkun. So it's like they call it literally world repair. So it's like it's man's duty to repair the cosmos that was broken during the creation. And so these ideas really emerged under these really apocalyptic milieus. And so, I think they all compounded, and then you have like, it becomes even more prevalent whenever there's more apocalyptic speculation. So that's where the 17th century becomes really a definitive part, where you have like the appearance of Sabbatai Zevi, who was this false Messiah that he was he declared himself Messiah. He was a Kabbalist, and he was famous for what's called antinomianism, which is, interestingly, Martin Luther popularized the term antinomianism. It's a negation of the law. And so they believe that, I think I covered this somewhere in this article, if I can find it. If not, it's in the other one. This is 2 articles. Okay, so here, sorry, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked as I scroll here. I'll try to stay. This is the Shekinah stuff here. So you can see that they used, the founding fathers used the imagery of Shekinah in the Great Seal. That right there is the Shekinah cloud. Mm-hmm. And so in Kabbalah, the Shekinah represents exile. And so they saw like the passage through across the Atlantic and the discovery of America as a kind of like this messianic event that occurred. And interestingly, Christopher Columbus wrote about this in his letter to Isabella, that he was going to find enough gold in the Americas to rebuild the temple. So, this all ties into Freemasonry, because Freemasonry, their goal is to rebuild the temple, whether that's allegorical or literal. I think at this point we know that it contributed greatly to like some semblance of a literal rebuilding of the temple. So you see the Shekinah here above the eagle with a star of quote David, as they call it, inside of it. And so I talked about that here a little bit. There's the Hebrew depiction of it. This gets a little wild, so I don't know if I want to avoid getting your channel flagged, but this is I think what I was trying to mention was maybe I can tie this into the Sabbatean stuff I was just talking about. This involves really wild ritual that the Hasidims do that you've probably seen when they do that rocking motion when they're praying. It's called, actually, I call it davening here, but I think it's more specifically called shuckling. And they believe that they're literally air humping to unify the Shekinah. They're having like a mystical intercourse to unify the opposing forces and strengthen the Shekinah. And so they do this typically at the Wailing Wall, as they call it, because they believe that's where the presence of the Shekinah is the strongest. Mm-hmm. And so I'm quoting rabbis, by the way, that are admitting this. I'm not like this isn't like a conspiracy theory. Like they actually will talk about this.
Right.
And so, I get a little bit political here, but
that ties into that concept of tikkun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how that's like one of the many ways that they practice tikkun olam. Now you have in the Reformed in Reformed Judaism, this tends to be their version of tikkun olam comes through progressive causes. So this is why they get really involved in feminism and all these like LGBT, all these progressive causes, because they believe that that's going to repair the world.
Right. It is like a form of humanism. And
yeah.
it can kind of it is one of the base frameworks of the Masonic movement as well. And what's interesting is we see parallels. We see parallels between Kabbalism, which is actually one of the bedrocks of influence within the Masonic movement, and we will actually see several modern groups that are known to be influenced and infiltrated by Masons repeating the same type of terminology. And as you're saying, it's kind of pushing liberal axioms. Well, if you were to read the Alta Vendita, there were a couple of different key statements that it said that it wanted to push across as it infiltrated, specifically in that text, the Roman Catholic Church. It was to disseminate liberal axioms, to push religious pluralism, to push for the separation of church and state. And what you'll notice as these groups begin to get influenced by these kind of Masonic undercurrents, which is also prevalent all throughout the Protestant Reformation. I can dive into that in a bit as well. But you'll notice them start to use the same exact talking points, and the theology actually begins to get influenced, and it becomes more about, it's more human focused. It's focused towards repair, the person, the well-being of the person, not necessarily the well-being of their soul, but the well-being as humanity as like a blanket statement. And we see this in recent statements, actually. I'm going to pull that down for just a moment, and I'll pull it back up. But we see this in recent statements, actually, from Pope Leo, who actually cites
that's right,
that exact term, tikkun olam, right there.
Yeah.
This was a statement from Pope Leo in September 20th, 2025. So not too long ago. Our Jewish brothers and sisters tell us one of the great projects given the human family, so we're talking about humanism here, by God, is to complete and perfect the very good creation God has been given to us. Tikkun olam. So he's literally teaching kabbalistic theology from his pulpit, and people.
Well, and not only that, but it's actually anti-Christian, because it calls part of restoring the world is destroying Christendom, and this is in the Zohar too, by the way. So I was, referencing the conditions in which the Zohar was written, and I just wrote an article on this as well. I published it on my Substack, and you can see how there's all these. I'm referencing Jewish scholars, so like I'm big on like actually. Right. Like bypassing all the secondhand sources and the conspiracy stuff, and like actually going to the scholars themselves, who admit that because the Zohar was written as an anti-Christian polemic. You may be familiar with the concept of like how they're tying Edom to Christendom, and that's in the Zohar. So like a lot of people think that's in the Talmud. It's actually in the Zohar, and so part of that restoring of the world involves the destruction of they call it the kingdom of idolatry, which is Christians. So it's wild that you have the Pope actually promoting this doctrine, this eschatological Jewish doctrine that involves inadvertently the destruction of Christendom, and especially Rome, because it's explicitly tied to Rome. And you hear actually even Netanyahu talks about this on camera. Like there was that kind of like a famous interview, or someone like kind of caught him walking recently in the last couple months, and they were asking him about a book he was reading, and he was reading a book called like The Destruction of Rome, or not Rome, but I think it was something about Rome. And then there's like also footage of him talking about Rome as Edom.
Yeah.
So like even Netanyahu admits this, but so that's very insane that the Pope is promoting that idea.
And he lays it out. It's not like he was very vague about it. I mean, he uses the term, but not only does he use the term, he actually talks about the exact theology about in reference to it. Our Jewish brothers and sisters tell us one of the great projects given the human family by God is to complete and perfect the very good creation God has given us. Tikkun Olam. And he talks about somebody else who taught this as well, Pope JP2, right? Wrote, if an artist cannot be stopped from using his creativity, then neither those who possess particular gifts for the advancement of science and technology be prevented from using their God-given talents for the service of others. And what we see actually, some of the lesser discussed aspects of Vatican II have to do with this promulgation of humanism. And a lot of these same precepts are actually taught in Vatican II itself. We can see the pushing of this kind of socialist framework. And as you were talking about liberal axioms being disseminated, this is more of a humanist framework rather than a redemptive framework. So it's almost like a complete 180 in their eschatology. It's very interesting to witness, and this is something that a lot of people miss. This is actually, Jay has discussed this at length, by the way. We can go into depth about the kind of Masonic, kabbalistic influence on Vatican II, but it is prevalent.
Yeah. And there's so if anyone's interested in that particular subject, there's a fantastic tome. It's like a 1,000-page book by Michael Hoffman. It's called The Occult Renaissance Church of Rome. He talks a lot about obviously the Renaissance, but what occurred during the Renaissance with all the syncretism, as I was mentioning before, how it actually affected long term the like what we see developing in Vatican II. So it kind of like set the precedence for that. So yeah, I mean, it's wild that's like even coming out of the mouth of the Pope, that phrase, but yeah, here we are. So yeah, I mean, this is why, you can look at this, I guess, from a Catholic perspective, but I think I found it to be much more prominent because of the sectarian nature of Protestantism in various Protestant movements. One of the most prominent ways that it transmitted actually was through the Pietists. So again, inadvertently, but they developed this whole kind of like, inner emphasis on like this inner piety that is very, that's a whole other subject I won't get too deep into, but a lot of ties with them to the Rosicrucians, and it made its way into Puritanism very prominently as well.
Well, that actually would be a bit of an interesting subject to touch on just briefly, because it is like the polar opposite of hesychasm and Orthodox theology, because the Pietists, right, they have a kind of massive focus on this like emotionalism, almost semi-charismatic styles of prayer, not with the tongues, but as far as focusing on these kind of I don't want to say revelatory, but it's more of an emotionalism that leads to spiritual delusion. And you see all sorts of different strains of heresy come spewing forth after the Pietist movement, wherever it creeps in. We actually see this semi-present in the Roman Catholic Church today. Their monastics, I mean, just completely polar opposite fruits-wise from the Orthodox Church and our monastics. I've discussed this at length with Father Peter Heers on the show when we were discussing I guess, kind of some of the fruits of Vatican II and the post-Vatican II canonization, some of the women histrionic saints and their quote-unquote saints, fake saints, and their stories are just dripping with prelest. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. But anything you want to touch on that subject, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's like I said, that's kind of what made me really interested in this. Is like it started with the charismatic stuff, and there is that. You're right. It does like kind of manifest in like ecstatic behaviors, ecstasy. So, and actually, the early Jewish mystics were described as like invoking this kind of like state of ecstasy for their meditations.
Yes.
So there, yeah, I mean, again, like this is where it gets into the realm of like, it's more speculatively traced to that. You have to know what the traditions taught and kind of transmitted throughout the centuries to even speculate this with any substance. But so that's why, a lot, I wouldn't even say a lot, but like some of the stuff in these articles are a bit speculative to that degree. And I've been working on a book on this so that I'm kind of taking a more scholarly approach so that it can't be, critiqued as much, although I'm not really getting much criticism on these articles, and a lot of people have seen them now. So
you've got one critic in the chat.
That's it.
So there's your one critic,
Jason
say? Biggs. He says, what is the scholarly legitimacy of this article? So I guess
I can show you the sources.
Absolutely. So this is what I would recommend to you, Jay. I don't want to take too much time out of the stream to do that, but do this. I will post the article in the description. You can go and check it out, and you can check out the sources that are attributed in the article itself.
Yeah, and like I said, there's more. Those sources in that article are not all scholarly, but in the year that's passed since I've published these, I've been able to substantiate these claims with scholarly sources. So if you do have questions about anything in particular, like I wouldn't be able to provide you a single source that covers all of this, but like if you wanted a particular subject, I could give you multiple scholarly sources on any of this.
Yeah, I don't think that guy is particularly interested. He just seems like he's trolling the chat. But.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of that. I mean, like I said, I understand. I get it because it's a very kind of wild claim, I guess. But I found this from reading like academic work on it. So like that's how I stumbled upon this rabbit hole, was like from reading academic work. I will say that, part of the reason why it seems so shocking is because it is a relatively new discovery. Western esotericism hasn't been given a scholarly treatment until pretty recently. Right. The last 100 years, not even almost. Like I think this really started to have a serious scholarly discourse around the 1970s, 1980s. Most of my sources are from on this are from the 90s and the 2000s. So it's like this is a pretty new field of research. So, there's also that. It's like if you were to say this stuff probably like 100 years ago, you'd be laughed, you'd be a laughing stock. But, yes, I do acknowledge that. I get it. I know that this maybe on its face sounds ridiculous, even the title of the articles or whatever, but it's all there.
What's interesting though is if you were to look at kind of the fruits of kabbalistic thought, and you were to look at even the fruits of pietism and spiritual delusion, it's evident if you were to compare East versus West, even today. I mean, look at the Roman Catholic charismatic movement. We're talking about pietism, right? That would be pietism kind of taken to the extreme, introducing charismatic elements. But if you were to look at this kind of pietistic understanding of even prayer, look at how that manifests in the life of these Western figures that practices that were involved in practices adjacent to this kind of emotional getting yourself worked up into an ecstatic session of prayer. This is big in Roman Catholicism today. They won't admit the tie to pietism, but the parallels are very obvious. And we see this in the modern Roman Catholic Church today. They always tell you to close your eyes and to picture, picture Jesus on the cross, picture the blood dripping from him, picture the crown of thorns on his head, picture him, like weeping or whatever. And that honestly is the exact opposite of what the Eastern fathers and the monastics tell us to do, which is don't do that at all, because you're going to get psyoped by demons.
Yeah,
you're going
exactly.
To be, that is a speed run into spiritual delusion, because then you associate the image with the object, right?
Yeah.
Which bleeds into theology, right? Look at Vatican II. Muslims have the same God as Christians. Well, they're saying, oh, it's the same referent. Well, can't you see where the that kind of image prayer referent is the same as the object issue plays in theologically as well? It bleeds into one another.
Yeah. And it's actually that's a very prominent theme as well throughout all this is universalism. I have on my desk it's a 2-volume series. It's probably about 2,000 pages. It's called The Devil's Redemption. And this is a scholarly work as well. And he's covering in great depth a lot of the stuff that I cover, and following the same transmission and just basically showing how it's all what developed the universalist kind of approach to Christian theology. It involves all these esoteric movements and stuff. And then, of course, like you can look at like David Patrick Harry's work. He's following the same exact transmission. And his conclusion is that it results in transhumanism. And both are equally true. Both of those conclusions are 1,000% true, because this didn't lead to one thing. It led to it became various threads throughout the centuries that have manifested in many ways. So you can kind of like take a lot of you can conclude this with a lot of things. In these articles I'm concluding with like this is what led to Christian Zionism. So that's where I'm going with it. But you could just as easily go any other route in that regard.
Mm-hmm. I mean, wherever you want to go with it, man.
Yeah.
You know what? Actually, I would like to kind of segue into something really, really quickly, because we were talking about the subject of Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm.
So let me pull up. I'm going to pull something up real quick, and then I'll do a little presentation, because we've talked about Kabbalism for a while, and I know we're going to get into it a little more in depth. But the subject of this live stream, I titled it Esoteric Origins of Protestantism. And I think what would be very interesting is to show, at least in the American context, just how ingrained Freemasonry was in its formation and in its development. So give me one moment. I'm going to pull up some information on that real quick, and then I'm going to share. I've done a number of talks on Freemasonry.
That's where this starts, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm starting here.
Yeah,
the invisible college is from Francis Bacon. He kind of like imagined. He initially imagined, like the Freemasons consider Francis Bacon the founder of Masonry.
Yeah, interesting. Give me one moment. I'm just gonna pull up. Okay. I could just talk about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So in the American context, what you will notice, the dissemination of Masonry is intrinsic to the foundation of America. Our very first president, George Washington, was a very prominent Freemason. Upon his election, he actually wrote a letter to the Masonic Lodge of which he was a member, and he said, "I will do what is in the best interest of the lodge in which I am a member." This was his acceptance letter. This was what he wrote after his acceptance to the presidency. George Washington happened to be a member of the Episcopal Church, which is basically the American Anglican branch. But he was a member of the Episcopal Church, and several other Episcopal leaders during not only America's founding, but later on had ties to Freemasonry. We see this continue on to this day. It is permitted within the Episcopal Church. at their largest seminary. It's actually built right next to the George Washington Freemasonic Monument. If you were to look at the Washington National Cathedral, it is, first off, it's an Episcopal National Cathedral, but it was built with grants and donations from prominent Freemasons. So, I mean, it's got deep, deep ties to American Protestantism, especially in the Anglican context. But if you're even to talk about the Presbyterians, before they came over to the United States, there's a very prominent Jesuit priest, Reverend Cahill, and he wrote a book called Freemasonry and the Anti-Christian Religion. And what this text goes through, it's sessions of dialogue between him and a master Mason, and then also intercepted letters, so on and so forth. And it kind of goes into the role of Masonry in subverting different Protestant groups within Europe, and a dialogue that he has with a master Mason, this Reverend Jesuit Reverend. Well, he's a Catholic priest, but Reverend E. Cahill. Anyway, he has a dialogue with a master Mason, and in this dialogue, the master Mason makes the excuse. He says, "Well, Masonry is not anti-Christian. We are not like the Southern Masons. We don't get involved in political subversion. We don't get involved in." He's trying to make a distinction between Northern European Masons and Southern Masons. But what he says is, we are not anti-Christian. In fact, all of the leaders of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland are members of the lodge. So he ends up doing an opposite apologetic. He shows that these institutions have been deeply subverted. And of course, if you were to trace the path of Presbyterianism to the United States, obviously a lot of these groups are stemming from their European counterparts. So when they are implemented in the United States, of course, they carry over this Masonic baggage. Now, granted, some of the conservative offshoots have condemned Masonry, the LCMS being a prominent example of condemning Masonry. The PCA, which is a branch off in Presbyterianism, condemned Masonry as well. But their mainline counterparts, it's still open and practiced. So, but especially we're talking about at its formation, Masonry and the Protestant Reformation are entwined, especially in the American context, is very, very prevalent. So what you see in each of these groups, in each of these mainline denominations that have accepted Masonry wholesale, either their founders in the American context were prominent Masons, or the seminaries are funded by Masons, or they've allowed them into their ranks, so on and so forth. What you see is a degradation of theology over time, and it becomes more and more pluralistic, becomes more and more liberal. Now, if you recall, when I was discussing that text, the Alta Vendita, a couple of the goals that they had listed as far as their subversion of the Roman Catholic Church was the dissemination of liberal axioms, religious pluralism, separation of church and state. Well, look at America's founding, right? We've already got one of those three marks ticked off the checklist, right? So what are the other two? You've got religious pluralism, and you've got the dissemination of liberal axioms. Look at the mainline denominations today, and look at the state of them. Almost all of them teach religious pluralism, and certainly all of the mainline Protestant denominations are extremely liberal. Their theology is morphed into, basically nothing. It's just like make it up as you go land. Look at the ELCA with the Sparkle Creed. Look at the PCUSA. There was a sermon I just heard from a PCUSA woman pastor who was saying something along the lines of like Jesus didn't actually resurrect or something. Just like absolute insanity. It's a free for all. Now, take the lens away from Protestantism. Go and look at the modern Roman Catholic Church. What do you see from the Pope Francis, who had since passed away? All religions are paths to God. These types of statements. You've got Pope Leo citing kabbalistic theology, right? You've got him saying that we don't. This is a citation from Pope Leo. Paraphrase of a citation. He literally said something along the lines of, "We do not have the fullness of the truth. We're all journeying there, and we need to learn from other religions." That's religious pluralism. So you can see the groups that have subverted these institutions. It's very clear. It seems like the Freemasons were actually successful in their subversion of these institutions. Now, granted, they might not go by the name Masons today. What I've often said is ecumenist and Mason are synonyms. So while they might not necessarily be about the same organization, within the Alta Vendita, the motto is the soldier dies and the war goes on. So it's not so much about the institution placing people into certain positions. It's about disseminating these ideas into the heads of the people that are in leadership, and then having those leaders disseminate the ideas into their successors. The Alta Vendita explicitly states that the idea was not to place a Mason onto the chair of Peter, but it was to raise up the next generation of bishops and prelates that would be amenable to Freemasonic Enlightenment ideas. So Protestantism, especially in the American context, is highly, highly, highly founded upon Enlightenment Masonic concepts and axioms.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I would actually say that the establishment of the Masonic institution was an inevitable result of Protestant Enlightenment thought. And I actually, you know, this was another idea that I kind of developed like as I was doing my research after publishing these articles, but you know, kind of another something within the realm of speculation. But you can see within the first generation of the Reformation, figures like Paracelsus and like some of his circle. He was pretty much the guy that introduced alchemy into the radical Lutheran movements, and this idea started to develop of the invisible church. And so, I contest that, you know, again, wouldn't be able to defend this with like scholarly sources, but it seems to me like the establishment of this, universal institution of Masonry was almost like the physical incarnation of the invisible church, because it started off, as I say here in the article, as the invisible college that Francis Bacon kind of developed this idea of this invisible college in his book, The New Atlantis. And this was kind of the prototype of Masonry, of the Masonic network. And it was specifically created as a global initiative to establish a Protestant hegemony. And so, you know, this is where, like, I'm talking about John Dee here as well, because Frances Yates, she's like kind of one of the most prominent scholars of Western esotericism. She says that John Dee and Francis Bacon both kind of were the founders of the New World, of this, Enlightenment idea of the New World as a like a kind of a global Protestant hegemony. And so, you know, there's all these images. This is why, like, a lot of people like David Patrick Harry emphasizes this point too, because the New Atlantis also has a lot of these transhumanist ideas that he envisioned, like all this advanced technology of these, like, you know, from these really enlightened people and whatnot. This is, you know, the early manifestation of this was the Rosicrucian order, which was early 17th century. So not like roughly 100 years after the Reformation, this started to establish. You have all the, you know, the millenarian movement. I'm kind of really breezing through this, but just showing you the transmission is here.
I think this foundation is especially seen in Christian Zionism, which is kind of a popular discussion today.
Yep,
if you want to, let me do this. Let's segue into that topic, because I think that'll be interesting to break down. But let me answer these super chats real quick, and then we'll continue on. Stilgard, good to see you, man. $10. Interesting fact: the numerical value of the Mia Shiarim ultra orthodox in Jerusalem is the number of the beast. It's evil. That is an interesting parallel. So what are you trying to say by that, though? Are you trying to say like they are they are that? I'm pretty sure the correct interpretation of that would be it was the emperor, correct? That's what I've heard. Dylan's Law, $5. Do we need to understand ancient Jewish Near East context to understand Scripture in its proper context?
Is that for me?
I guess so. I mean, the answer would be no. You don't need to understand that to understand Scripture in its proper context. The church, as a living body, helps you to understand Scripture in its proper context.
That's the mistake. That's the kind of the foundation of the mistake that we're talking about here, is they started to prioritize like these Jewish understandings of Scripture. No, they don't recognize Christ as prefigured in the Old Testament, and that's like the kind of the foundation of the Old Testament, is that it's foreshadowing Christ. So how could you go to people who reject Christ for interpretations?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is you even have conservative, quote unquote, conservative Protestants that have actual rabbis on staff. We covered this in one of my Roman Catholic news segments. This just happened to be covered. The LCMS has rabbis on staff as clergy. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I can actually.
So this is prevalent throughout all the Protestant denominations. None of them are free from this influence. It is at the very bedrock, spreading over from Europe into the American context. Even if they formally decry Masonry as a teaching, these presuppositions are there at the very foundation, and this comes from their breakaway from tradition, ultimately. Because in the kabbalistic context, as we're talking about, at its very origin, it's not the Kabbalist origin, but in the kind of Protestants accepting this, the origin of that would be the rejection of church authority, church tradition, in favor of modern Talmudic rabbi interpretations. I mean, this is what you get. You get Ted Cruz quoting the Talmud. I mean, you've got evangelical pastors quoting, rabbis in their sermons. It's absolutely insane. I mean, but you can see this much earlier on as well. And you actually see seeds of this, like I said, in the West from figures like Jerome.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this actually in opposition of the tradition of the church too. Even in Jerome's context, because he was pushing back against some of the other figures that held opposing positions. And in one case, particularly in the version of Daniel that was to be included in the Latin Vulgate, he wanted to go with a particular version. It was actually from a Christian source, but influenced by some of the rabbis that he was speaking with, and was saying that was the version that they, I guess, had used and were accepting. But the church actually pushed back on that, made him use the version that was compiled by Theodotion. So kind of interesting. Anything you wanted to add to that, or so just kind of like going on?
Well, I do want to, if it's okay, I want to comment on something in the chat, if I can find it. Someone's okay. Yeah. Josh was saying Martin Luther died in 1546, guys. No Rosicrucian. Yeah. Well, so, okay. What he's getting at here, that's correct. The official establishment of the Rosicrucian order wasn't until the early 17th century. So to say that Luther was like a crypto Rosicrucian, you couldn't argue that historically. At least with like scholarly backing. I have seen people try to tie him to like a proto Rosicrucian order that he was tied to Stoppins, which I wasn't able to substantiate, and I actually I originally included that in the article, and I removed it because I'm like actually interested in the accuracy of this, because I don't think you need to make any stretches to show this transmission. So I just took that out. But there, yeah. So the fact is, it did develop through Lutherans. Like the original Rosicrucians were Lutherans, though. They were second-gen Lutherans.
Yeah. If you go back, Josh, because I don't know, it kind of seems like you're just trolling in the chat. But if you go back at the very beginning of this discussion, one of the first things that was said was this did not come directly from Luther himself. right? This is
Yeah.
more the next generation, so on and so forth, the generations after
I
that.
wouldn't tie this to any single figure, honestly. I mean, it was, and then, you know, and to be fair, like I would say by the, you could probably even argue by the 16th century, or I'm sorry, the 17th century, and definitely by the 18th century, this becomes something that is like not consciously adopted by the Protestants who are transmitting these, this theology, this, you know, the syncretism. They're not consciously doing it. They're not saying like, oh, wow, this is kabbalistic. Isn't this interesting, guys? Let's integrate it into our theology. Like, right. It just becomes like a result of the syncretism and the sectarianism that developed, you know, and it became very obscure. That's why I'm doing a lot of work to kind of describe like the stuff you need to know about Kabbalah in this particular context. You don't need to know everything about it, but if you wanted to trace this transmission, you should know the core ideas that were appropriated. And then that way, like as it transmits, you can kind of identify what that is as they appear. So that, yeah, that's just something to clear up. But yeah, so I don't know if you want to get back to the Freemason stuff, but
yeah, here, let me finish getting to these super chats.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay.
We'll go back into it. Marantha, $5. Cleve, what is your answer now to the EO list of infallible traditions? Your old argument that you made defending the Prot's infallible list of books, it's not necessary. That was the entire point. The argument would be the exact same. It's a stupid argument for people to make. So as an Orthodox, and even as a Roman Catholic, it's a dumb argument to make. You need an infallible list of infallible books. People ask me about this on every stream, but go back and watch the last stream that I did with Father Stephen DeYoung, and it comes up again there, and he holds the same position. It's a bad argument. The reason that it's a bad argument is because if you were to hold to the standard of, well, you need an infallible list of infallible books in order to hold the books as infallible. Well, were they not infallible prior to the formalization of the canon, right? So what do you do with that? And then in addition, can you show me your infallible list of infallible traditions? The answer is it's not necessary, right? That would be the answer. The conclusion would be different depending on framework, but the answer is it's not necessary to have an infallible list, right? The early church didn't need it. We don't need it. We have a defined list, right? But it's not necessary. You're imposing a necessity on something that's not necessarily the case. But if you want to see more information on that, go watch the stream that I did with Father Stephen DeYoung, and we talk about that subject. Good question, though. Orthozowski, can I get unblocked on Twitter? Send me an email. I don't know. I block a lot of people on Twitter very fast. So
$20 for an unblock.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, 20 bucks for unblock. There you go. Nice. But yeah, send me an email because I won't remember that username. But thanks for becoming a member as well. Mia asks, I've heard of Shekinah glory from our former pastors. Can you include the sources about it in the description? Thank you.
So that in particular, like I said, there's no way to like substantiate that other than it's just an odd, you know, kind of coincidence. So like I wouldn't be like, I think where I first heard that actually was from Michael Hoffman. So you know, if I were to recommend the Occult Renaissance Church of Rome, it might be somewhere in there. That's a 1,000-page book and it costs about $80. So
go read 1,000 pages.
Yeah, I don't have the exact site. That was something that I'm, you know, because of that, I'm not really emphasizing that point anymore. It was just kind of an observation. So yeah, it's not like there's a whole book or something on that in particular.
Yeah.
I do show, I mean, if you wanted to see like what I have on it, in the, let me see if I have, I'll just show this real quick. I know you're getting through super chats. I included something about it here. Sorry for the scrolling.
Thanks for coming on the show, by the way. This has been fun, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Many other evangelical. So I kind of list like the prominent pastors that I've heard teach this very, frequently. And then how it's not in the Hebrew Old Testament, and how in the New American Standard Bible, 2 Chronicles chapter 7, it was included as a section heading, the Shekinah glory, even though, again, that term Shekinah is not anywhere in the old Hebrew Old Testament.
There you go. So if you want to look at that, check out the Substack article, which
Yeah.
I'll include in the description if I haven't already. I think I did, but if I haven't, I'll make sure it's in there. Last super chat here. By the way, only 4 more super chats till we hit goal. If you have a question or something, send it in the form of a super chat. We'll pull it up on the screen and address it, but also help us reach the goal. It is the OG version of what happens when you send your children for higher learning. I don't know what you mean by that. Is that
what's up,
when was
IZ,
that
bro?
sent in?
That's one of my guys. What was he talking about? Higher learning. I don't know when that came in. It was probably commenting on something that I forgot what it was talking about.
Let us know. Let us know the context
yeah.
in the comments, and I'll pull it up. But yeah, it'd be interesting. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Yeah, again, only 4 more till goal. Help us reach the goal in this live stream. I appreciate y'all's support. All right, so you had something else you wanted to dive into here?
Well, so I broke this up into 2 articles, and this gets more into like following how this developed into dispensationalism and modern Christian Zionism. And so I'm basically just showing how you could trace the origins of Christian Zionism back to the 17th century. That's where the Puritans started really, like with the millenarian movements, they started really developing this idea of hastening the end times, which is that's a kabbalistic concept. So that's another one that emerges where you don't even have to adopt Kabbalah explicitly and directly. It just became a kind of immersed. This idea became immersed in the eschatology of the Puritanism, and there was a lot of cross pollination with with the Jewish community at the time. Of course, everyone knows about the opening, the readmitting the Jews back into England after like a 400-year expulsion, thanks to Cromwell, and working with this secret society that he was in with Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel.
Whoa, you mean to tell me Cromwell's not based? Come on.
Yeah. Well,
my based Cromwell, my based
I know.
Cromwell.
Yeah, but I saw a based Cromwell edit though.
I did. Unironically, when I was a Protestant, they'd share that all the time.
Yeah, and it's like he's always doing some kind of iconoclasm. He's like, breaking the altar or something like that.
Right,
yeah.
He's not based at all. He's sucked.
No. Yeah,
like,
he's so cringe.
Most famous for Christmas. Christmas sucks. We're getting rid of it. Icons suck. We don't want the cross. We don't want any of this stuff. We're just gonna like stare at a blank wall or something.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Puritan England was sounded like a nightmare, dude. Absolutely insane.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had this big, so again, another apocalyptic event. You had the coming of the year 1666, which happened to be the same year that this, I was talking about this earlier, as Sabbatai Zevi appears as the false Messiah. They think he's the real Messiah. And a lot of Puritans, not I wouldn't say like a majority of them, but like some Puritans actually started following his movement. This is what is now, people call like all these conspiracy theorists, like kind of tie the Rothschilds to the Sabbatarians or the Frankists as they later became, which there's actually, that's true. Mayor Emshel Rothschild was a Frankist. And so this gets into like this idea that they were promoting called the redemption through sin, antinomianism. That involves like this descent into the demonic realm. This is from the Zohar. Again, I talk about this in the latest article I published. And it's like about the balancing of opposing forces. So like I can get into a whole thing about this, but interestingly, in the Zohar, they have a commentary on Job, and in that commentary on Job, the author of the Zohar depicts Job as a fool because he failed to make a propitiation to the demonic realm to ward off Satan's attacks. So if he only just balanced out good and evil, he wouldn't have suffered so much. And so this involves like this is the metaphysical basis of Sabbatarianism, of particularly antinomianism, which, to be fair, it is considered a heresy within even within Kabbalistic Judaism, but it's like kind of the same thing. Like calling a Jewish heresy a heresy is kind of like one Protestant denomination calling another denomination heresy. Like they kind of have no basis for it, but
it's a subjective accusation.
Yeah.
ID Bro sends a context to his previous super chat. He said the Judaizing of early Protestants in their schools, and then he clarifies even more. He says, I'm comparing the liberalification of the modern mind in colleges to the Judaizing of the old minds and the schools of higher learning, the OG Blue Harris. Well, one thing that I can kind of touch on that is when you talk about theological subversion, a lot of this stuff does tend to happen in seminaries. You see this even in the Orthodox world under the Bolsheviks, right? Or even in the prelude rather to the Bolshevik Revolution. Oftentimes it was the seminaries that were used. And how do you do this? Well, they would incentivize women to go to colleges, not necessarily seminaries, but they would incentivize women to go to colleges so they could find a husband, so on and so forth. And that kind of broke up the family. But also in the modern context, in the seminaries we find today, even in the Protestant world, a lot of the grants, right, they are subject to terms and conditions. You have to fit within a certain mold per se. The words that you use in the letters that you send in to apply for these grants kind of work as they'll weed you out based off of these things. So they'll get people that they feel are more amenable to certain ideologies within these institutions, and the third parties will grant the grants to individuals that fit that specific mold, and then that changes the culture within seminaries. A lot of times, one key thing to look at is what NGO is giving these scholarships and what NGO is giving grants to the seminaries themselves,
and who else they're funding.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. I mean, because that's the only real benefit that they get out of funding these institutions. They're not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They're doing this so that they can influence what's being taught. So yeah, a lot of the subversion and corruption does come from oftentimes historically the seminary system, which is why Orthodoxy, especially in its Eastern context, except for maybe under the Bolsheviks, so on and so forth, has remained relatively unchanged and lesser amounts of subversion than we've seen in the Western context. Because in the East, except for in the context like Russia, where they are operating off of the seminary system, and some of these other countries, they're not operating off of a seminary system. They're operating off of an apprenticeship model for ordinations. So this actually helps to avoid some of the issues that we see prevalent in the West, as far as some of these groups subverting the institutions. So something to chew on. That's actually something that Father Andrew Damick brought up in a show where they were talking about that with Matthew Namey a while back. So.
Well, so this is kind of finally getting around to what your comments on Protestant involvement in Masonry. Mm-hmm. And so I found this really interesting that exactly 2 centuries of fragmenting the Christian world, the Protestant Reformation of 1517 laid the groundwork for a new religious architecture of Freemasonry in 1717. And as described in a 1917 issue of the Hamburger Fremdenblatt commemorating Masonry's 200th year anniversary and the Reformation's 400th year anniversary. So that I'm like fascinated by that separation in history of 200 years from the Reformation, 200 years later, Freemasonry, and then 1917 also a pivotal year because it's the beginning of the Russian Revolution. Also happens to be the same year that the what's it called? The creation of Israel was agreed upon by the why am I blanking on the name? It's down here somewhere.
One of those groups.
No, it was it's like a famous signing of it's when England signed the agreement with the Rothschild signed the agreement to establish the Balfour Declaration. There we go. It's when the Balfour Declaration was signed as well.
Yes.
So another pivotal year, like a marking in like, revolutions in world history. So I just found that fascinating. But so that was commemorated in a Protestant publication. And I found, this is an academic source here. This guy's describing how this came about. And it's basically, kind of what you were saying. In the Protestant countries, it was the Enlightenment was in alliance with the more liberal parts of Protestantism. And then there was no anti-religious impetus. So these close ties developed between liberal Protestants and the Enlightenment, and it influenced Masonry in those regions, which led to the development of Freemasonry that's traceable in the different character of Masonry, for example, in France and the Anglo-Saxon world. So, even within Masonry, you have the factions similar to Protestantism, where you have the, Scottish Rite and the Egyptian Rite and the,
Right.
the different rites that kind of reflect the cultural milieu or whatever, or the different syncretic systems that they were adopting. And so,
that is one important thing to note, because people sometimes misunderstand when you're talking about Masonry as a group infiltrating different organizations. It's not as though Masonry is one unified body. It is more like it's several different grand lodges that are also, they're only really unified by this sense of ideology. They have their differences in how to apply the ideology. That's kind of the limits of their unification. So you have the different local lodges, so on and so forth. Like you're saying, these different factions. This is evident in several different pieces of text, one of which I cited earlier, which was Freemasonry and the anti-Christian movement. And there's differences based off of your region, differences based off of today in the modern context. Masonry as an organization is kind of irrelevant. It's more the ideology that is spread, which is why I say Masonry is kind of synonymous with ecumenism, because it's the same exact ideology. It's a copy and paste. But that was never really the intent. The intent wasn't for this organization to somehow become super powerful. It was to spread these kind of Enlightenment ideas throughout different organizations.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was successful in doing that. So that's why, that's why I'm not as concerned these days with like Masonic conspiracy, because they don't really operate that way anymore. They fulfilled their goal. And so what I'm writing here in this article is like in the context of this transmission, where you have this period where there's like a destruction of the old Christian order. And actually it's referred to in that context by historians, even Protestant historians refer to like kind of that period of 200 years between 1517 and 1717, where you have all these iconoclastic revolts and whatnot. So in many ways, like even in the physical iconoclasm, you have a literal destruction of the old order, but even more so ideologically, with Enlightenment ideas. And so the institution of Freemasonry served its purpose in building like how they're based on like a builder's guild. They built the ideological foundation of the new world. And so that's how I view it. And so that's why it's like people downplay this now, and they look at, like, they'll post the pictures of like these boomers in their Masonic aprons and be like, oh, you think this guy's controlling the world or whatever. It's like, yeah, the average Mason at the lodge has nothing to do with any of this. They're just, a frat. They're a glorified frat or whatever, but
right. Yeah. It would be like saying your average New Ager is controlling the world. These crystal ladies at the flea market or something.
Yeah.
It's the idea. It's the dissemination of these axioms within these different worldviews to subvert them. I mean, once that's in there, it's kind of like it is kind of a cancer. And we do see the power vacuum from Masonry's kind of fall into irrelevance ultimately has been replaced with the ecumenical movement. So I guess organizations you could point to would be like the World Council of Churches, for example.
Yep.
These would be excellent examples of kind of if you want to point to an organization that is pushing the same ideology, it's the spiritual successor of Masonry.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not saying that there still aren't Masonic subversions today.
Right.
I just don't think it's as much of an influential, like globally influential institution. A lot of the stuff you see now with like the conspiracies where like you might see like someone's flashing a Masonic symbol. I think that's more to do with like giving a nod to the fact that there's like, satanic forces at work that they're acknowledging amongst each other. It seems to me at least that that's more so what it is. But at this period, in the first like 100 years of its existence, it was very much that. It was very much like a global network, that had tremendous influence. And so, like you said, you can see it all. I mean, you could just point to the architecture of DC, and it's all over. All this, they designed the roads in the shape of a compass, and you have all these obelisks. And look at George Washington's memorial. It's a massive Masonic museum.
Right.
There's the Statue of Liberty was built by Masons, and they acknowledge it in the there's like a cornerstone plate on it that acknowledges that when they built the foundation of the Statue of Liberty, there was a Masonic ritual to commemorate it. All this crazy stuff. The Statue of Liberty itself is has a lot of esoteric significance. I think the French guy that I forget his name that actually built the statue was a Mason. So, it's all over our iconography in America. So, here I'm just
quote unquote iconography.
Yeah. So here I'm just showing like that it's tied to, as they call it, Judaism for the Gentiles. Freemasonry. So, and then you have admissions of that from Eliphas Levi, who is a Kabbalist and highly influential 33rd degree Master Mason. There's a lot more on this too. I was very brief with it. So, and then here, this ties into what you're saying too, how you can see to this day that there's depictions of the Masonic imagery in certain Protestant churches. I don't know that this is common, but here's one from 1900. I think this is an Episcopalian or Anglican church that's depicting Hiram Abiff, who is the mythical builder of Solomon's temple that they base Freemasonry on. Like all the rites are like involving Hiram Abiff. He's standing there between the two Masonic pillars of Joachim and Boaz. Right. So like this is in stained glass in all these Protestant churches. And so, making the distinction between speculative and operative Masonry, which is an important distinction. And how like this is getting into a little bit about the like transhumanist aspect where Freemasonry is thought of as a religion of technology, because it's based on building. So like building the new world. It involves, this emergence of tech in this bringing about of Tikkun. So, and then obviously the founder of Freemasonry was a I think he was an Anglican, if I'm not mistaken. And was it Anderson? Who signed the Declaration or the Constitutions of Freemasonry. So if you ever read that, you'll see all these like Protestant Enlightenment principles in the Constitution of Freemasonry. So it was founded by a Protestant as well. So I would say it's an entirely Protestant institution. And then it gets into Christian Zionism here. So where are we going here? I haven't looked at this in a while. I'm sorry. Jacob Frank, Sabbatai Zevi. So here you have Falk. So this is about the, I think this is about the, Swedenborg. Yeah, this is getting into some stuff that's still here today.
Yeah, why don't you present that
Yeah.
there? 'Cause I think this will be interesting to dive into. This is very applicable.
Okay.
I mean, if you want, I mean, you can just
Sure.
go through this in depth, this portion here. Give me
All
1
right.
second though. I'm gonna step away. I gotta run to the restroom real quick.
All right. Yeah, I guess I'll just read it then. So by 1756, widespread millenarianism enabled the Sabbateans to merge with a new messianic movement led by Jacob Frank, who believed himself to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. Now, I didn't include this here; it's just kind of a side, but this is a kabbalistic idea that they believe in reincarnation. So they believe that their messiahs are reincarnations of the previous messiah. You can see this in the Chabad Lovovich today. This is the group that surrounds Trump. These kind of like globalist rabbinic Orthodox Jews who are searching for their reincarnated Messiah actively, and so a lot of their work involves trying to hasten his reincarnation, his arrival, and they think that Trump plays a big role in that too. So it says, although Poland acted as their central focus, the Frankists grew in London through the Masonic network centered around Rabbi Samuel Jacob Falk, the unknown superior of the revolutionary Freemasons and the creator of the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy against European Christendom. So yeah, like I was saying, I mean, a lot of the work that the Masons were doing was to ideologically destroy Christianity. Even though it was founded as a Protestant, supposedly Christian institution. One European historian describes Falk as being revered as a master of the holy names of God by mystical Jews and theosophical Christians who sought his Kabbalistic instruction and assistance in medicine, alchemy, sexual magic, treasure finding. That's what Joseph Smith was into, lottery predictions, and diplomatic intrigue. So like there's a lot here, like even within that one statement that deserves more treatment, which I'm doing in my book. For example, like theosophical Christians, like, so this was Christian theosophy developed among second generation Lutherans, particularly Jakob Verma. I did a stream on him, and he developed this whole Kabbalistic framework of what he calls Christian theosophy by integrating Lutheran theology with it. And this was massively influential. You have people today, like even modern theosophy is based on Jakob Berma. You can look at Hegel, who considered Jakob Berma the godfather of what did he call it? The godfather of philosophy, or I guess modern philosophy. Hegel was deeply influenced, like the whole Hegelian dialectic is rooted in Jakob Verma's Christian theosophy. So anyway, it's just a little bit of a side, but yeah, this is where, like, I'm just explaining this to show this is why Christians got involved or Protestants got involved with this whole thing. Falk was seemingly had very little influence among the Jews. His own renown as a Kabbalist, magician, and alchemist was widespread among esoteric Protestants, making him a John Dee-like figure of the 18th century. Along with the Egyptian Rite Freemasonry, Falk inspired a crypto-Sabbatean cult of German pietists, there's the pietists, known as the Moravians, who are active today, who contributed greatly to this intersection of Jewish and Puritan communities across England. This brand of German pietism was developed by Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish mystic who, after being exposed to Kabbalistic ideas at Uppsala University, believed he talked with angels similar to Dee. Swedenborg also greatly influenced by Falk in his turning to occultism from a career as a scientist and inventor. Much can be said about this character, Emanuel Swedenborg. Entire books have been written about him and his mystical theology, which is entirely
an entire denomination named after him, Swedenborgianism.
Yeah. I mean, and the Moravians are very prominent in certain areas of, I believe, in the East Coast. I think maybe New York. I know in Pennsylvania, there's still very active Moravian communities to this day. And they trace their roots back to like the Hussites, I believe, because they're from Bohemia. So I don't know that there's like an actual link there, but that's what they claim.
Yeah. Interesting.
So while in London, Falk led Swedenborg met with Falk, where he led a community of occultists comprised of Freemasons, Kabbalists, Rosicrucians, and Moravian Brethren. That was later formally established as the Moravian Church. There you go, in 1722, by Count Zinzendorf. This is another wild guy, which he later moved to Pennsylvania. As the pupil and grandson of Philip Jacob Spener, that was the founder of Lutheran Pietism, Zinzendorf merged his connections between Rosicrucians and Freemasons to create his own secret society called the Order of the Grain of Mustard in 1722. So this is like another common. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so there you have it, an entire Protestant denomination that is basically founded by actual Masons, Rosicrucians, and Kabbalists. So that's not such a such an obscure connection there. It's a direct connection in their founding.
Right. That's what I mean. It's like in some cases you can definitively find that that direct link, and then in other cases, like, so I mean, and this is kind of what this is the way I approach this research is like I would be reading something like this for the first time and not know what it's referring to, like when it says, for example, like pietists, or it's like maybe I never heard of what that group is. Better look into that because it seems like they had some part in this transmission. And so you look into that, and then it's like a lot of this involved going back, actually, like going back in time to trace the threads. But that's kind of how I went about it. It's like, well, I don't know what this group is. Obviously, Rosicrucians, Masons, but like sometimes they'll throw in a figure or a movement that is like, what is that about?
Yeah,
and you look into that, and it's like
Philip Blingenbacher founded the Order of Sesame.
Yeah. And then, as you do the research, you see the same names resurfacing, and it's like you kind of get the idea of who's the important figures in this transmission. Zinzendorf incorporated Kabbalah and Christian theosophy into his blasphemous antinomian doctrines, which emphasized meditating on the sexual organs of Christ, Lord have mercy, and the deviant sexualization of both marital and premarital relations. Again, this is the founder of a active Protestant denomination.
Right.
Following in Zevi's footsteps, Zinzendorf's son Christel also believed he was an embodiment of the Messiah and brought with him to London an antinomian tradition of skittles and sexual excess. I don't know if I can even say that.
One thing to note in this particular vein, we're talking about Kabbalistic undercurrents for various worldviews and the influence of Masonry in Roman Catholicism. If you were to look at some of the post-Vatican II histrionic women, quote-unquote saints, a lot of them did the same as Zinzendorf, meditating on that particular aspect of Christ, which is a form of prelest that comes from this kind of pietistic approach to prayer, trying to create an image in your mind that is the object of your worship. We have Catherine of Siena in one of her delusions. She received a foreskin ring from Jesus. Apparently,
isn't that who came up with the Sacred Heart?
No, that's not Catherine of Siena. That is what is her name? I'm blanking on it right now. That's not Catherine of Siena.
Okay.
Sacred Heart is good grief. Hold on. It's going to drive me nuts now. She was a Polish lady.
Yeah. There's some esoteric stuff there too as well.
Yeah, I did a whole video on her backstory. I don't know why I'm blanking on her name. Well, now I got to find out now.
But yeah, I mean, like these ideas don't emerge from a vacuum. So like that, I would imagine, even though I don't know much about that person, I don't even know her name. But like this whole idea of being fixated on like the organs of Christ or of the Virgin Mary, that kind of thing, I would assume that's where Zinzendorf in this case is getting that from. Like there's always a something you could follow to trace that back to.
It's St. Margaret Mary Alacoque.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Another interesting one with similar ties would be if you were to research the history behind the Divine Mercy devotion, Divine Mercy Chaplet. Her diary, the nun who came up with the devotion, is absolutely insane with notions of pre-last, Jesus is my boyfriend type theology, and these types of ecstatic visions, which comes from basically entering into the monastic life with this idea of pietistic prayer, working yourself up into a state of like emotional extremes, and then you basically work yourself up until you picture this image in your head, until this image becomes somewhat real. So you're kind of working yourself into a state of psychosis, and this is like speed running prelust. This is why a lot of the Orthodox saints and monastics warn explicitly against praying and attempting to picture images in your head. It's it happens naturally, but the focus on these things is a recipe for disaster, which unfortunately is the entire Roman Catholic monastic model, is to focus on these images. And in their devotions, it says, picture Christ's heart, picture Christ at the Garden of Gethsemane, picture the Virgin Mary's robes, picture her heart, picture her holding the baby Jesus, picture ABC 1 2 3, and all of these things. What you notice as you enter into this more and more deeper into the higher levels of prayer, this is the repetition of your entire life. This is what you're doing throughout your entire life. And if you focus on these images often enough, and with the intent of this kind of pietistic prayer, working yourself up into an emotional state, it's a recipe for disaster. I mean, you could do that yourself. I used to do this when I was a kid, to mess with people. When we would go out into the woods, we had a little tree house out there, and we go out there with my friends, and we try to psych them out into seeing things that weren't there. We do this all the time, like gaslight our buddies and be like, oh, because we're in Florida. I'd be like, oh, dude, do you see that out there? There's like two eyes in the darkness. There's a panther out there, dude. He's gonna come and get you. He's gonna like maul you to death, dude. Like, the kid would start freaking out. Oh, I see the panther. Oh, the panther's gonna get me. Like that's you can't see how that would happen.
Yeah, and usually when you do that, they don't question that you're seeing it. They're just more frustrated that they're not seeing it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, eventually they're like, yeah, I see it. I see the panther.
Yeah. You just
I see the panther. Oh.
Yeah.
He's gonna get me, dude. Dude, he just went behind the tree, bro. You don't see that little,
psyoping your bros. Great pastime.
Psyoping your bros for fun at 13 years old in the woods.
Yeah.
Running MK Ultra psyops in the woods. 13-year-old. Cleave the gaslighting. Funny. We used to do that all the time. I don't know why. We thought that was so funny as a kid. We would say like it's really stupid thing to do, but we would say like to our buddies in school, it's like, you remember that time I did ABC 1 2 3? It was like something we never did, and we're just like, no, you don't remember. We're like with Anthony, and we're like hanging out, and had like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you knocked over his milk or something, and he was talking about, just like make something up and then get them to believe it. Like, it's, oh yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, I remember you doing that. Just like, you dummy, that never happened. I don't know. We're just so dumb. That's what happens when you're bored. But to tie this back into the subject at hand, as a monastic, you've got a lot of time with your own thoughts and a lot of time with yourself. So that's a huge recipe for disaster if you if you were to take that approach to prayer.
Yeah, I mean, Father Seraphim Rose wrote about, or I guess lectured on this in the Orthodox Survival course. He uses Francis of Assisi as an example of how the Roman Catholic notion of asceticism kind of like took on a new, like the new miracles, like they established new miracles quite literally that you didn't see anywhere previously in the lives of the saints. He uses the stigmata, for example. And then he talks a lot about imaginative prayer practices and how dangerous that is to, to inspire delusions and things like that. So yeah, I would refer to that. He actually, a lot of the stuff that we're covering here, he goes into not as much of the esoteric stuff that I'm diving into, but he's following the same transmission as well, just more so like on the intellectual level in that course, because he starts with the Middle Ages and then he brings you all the way to the present day. And shows how like it's basically Enlightenment philosophy and all these the new miracles and like the ecumenism that he's always writing about.
Well, look at Padre Pio with his quote unquote stigmata. I mean, it was there was a big scandal. It was discovered he was buying
acid.
Acid to drip into his freaking hands. So I mean, like
just
a lot
IV dripping acid for like to prove a miracle. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was saying, no, I'm actually just using that to clean needles. That's what he said. So I bought all of this acid to just clean needles for the kids at the orphanage or whatever. That was the excuse or whatever from the people, not from him, but from the people that were covering for it. But yeah, it's interesting to see this kind of same core concepts being spread out in real time, and we could see this again looping back into the modern context with the Catholic charismatic movement and their exception of all sorts of crazy miracles today. We can see this with some of the Eucharistic miracles that they talk about, which for the Orthodox is actually like a bad thing. It's like a sign of lack of faith. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's so this image we're looking at right now, I mean, it kind of reminds me of some of the Sacred Heart iconography. It's got that same kind of like these lights kind of permeating from it. And so yeah, I mean, I didn't tie that together, but like there's probably something there. I just haven't looked into it. So let me just see if there's there's some stuff I probably can't even say on a stream on YouTube, but this is going into like Sabbateanism, kind of what I explained already. And I saw a comment earlier, I think it was Punished Warwig said something about this notion of the descent into the demonic realm. So that's not, to be clear, I mean, in the Zohar, which describes a completely different cosmology than we have in Christianity. They have this mirror realm of the divine realm. And so they think that the demonic realm it mirrors the divine, and that's why they have to keep it in dialectical balance. So like the divine realm depends on the realm of evil to exist or whatever. It's really wild.
It's like a Gnostic concept. Just
it is, yeah. It's almost entirely Gnostic, and you even have some of the foremost scholars of Kabbalah, like Gershom Scholem and Moshe Adel, like these really prominent scholars of Kabbalah will even admit that it has Gnostic origins.
Yeah, it sounds like just like black and white dualism. Basically.
It is, yeah.
It's like good can't overcome the evil. You just have to kind of balance it out.
You have to keep it in dialect. Yeah, it's all that, and that's like the basis of Western esoteric traditions is like this notion of the unity of opposites, the merging together the opposing forces.
Right.
And that's again that ties into Hegel's dialectic, right? It's like and that's, by the way, what the Shekinah represents too. The Shekinah that we were mentioning earlier,
yes, is
the kind of embodiment of the unification of opposing forces. So she represents exile and freedom, like at the same time. Like there's all these opposing things that they represent, that they embody. There's a whole other thing with Adam Kadmon we won't get into, but that's a whole other thing that they appropriated.
Here, let's get to some of these super chats.
Yeah.
ID Bro says the monastery is the heart of the church, not the university. Absolutely. If the university was the heart of the church, we'd be cooked.
Oh yeah.
We'd be cooked. You should do some deep dives into Fordham. That's a train wreck.
I saw that you did. Yeah, you've done some good stuff on that. You wrote a thread on that, I think, right? Yeah, that was
I did recently. There's a lot to dive into there.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Wilson did a whole Substack article on Fordham's subversion in areas like public orthodoxy, so on and so forth. But Fordham is a Jesuit university, so it's no surprise that they would be subversives, right?
Yeah.
Beauty of the Struggle, $2. Happy haircut, Ben. Keep up the dank guests. Dang, you got promoted to dank guest status. There you go.
Let's go.
Kermit King, cleave to stream goal. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. I appreciate it. And another super chat here from Alec W. Incense. Only one more super chat till we hit goal. Thank you all for the support. Just one more. We hit our goal. Woohoo!
W smells and bells.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me get W Incense in the chat. Spam W Incense. Let's go. I want to pull something up real quick before we dive into that, because somebody was questioning the Padre Pio acid faking his stigmata. This was actually from the Independent. So this is a mainstream news outlet. This was from 2007, but it goes into detail. I think the receipts are in here, maybe. I'd have to find the actual article then. This one isn't the one with the receipts, but there's a number of receipts that show that he had purchased like a astronomical amount of acid to drip into his hands to keep his wounds open. So Padre Pio was likely a fraud. But I mean, granted, you have the cope of saying, well, they used it to like sterilize needles or something. That was the counterclaim there.
How many needles did he have, bro? Like what? You need vats of acid.
They were saying it was to sterilize the needles for the orphans or something, because he helped run an orphanage. Octavian helped us reach goal. We was Masons. I hope not. But
yeah.
Thank you for helping me reach the goal. I appreciate it. Let me see.
I think he's talking about Protestants. We was Masons.
Yeah,
that's your ancestry.
I'm gonna do a different sound effect this time. We're gonna do a gong. How about that? Goal. Yeah, it's downright disturbing. Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna see if I can find that. Let me see if I can find the receipts, because that's interesting. Padre Pio acid receipts, but that's from the Independent. So that is a mainstream news outlet. Where?
Yeah, the trad cats will say that was anti-Catholic propaganda.
Yeah, anti-Catholic propaganda. Man, I wish I had this saved, because there was like an actual picture of the receipts somewhere. Hold on. Padre Pio acid receipts. Oh well, I guess it's not super important to find the picture of the receipts, but let me just share a picture of Padre Pio so you can see what I'm talking about here, because he had like just gnarly, bloody hands. And the accusation is that he kept them open by dripping acid into his hands. Carabolic acid is what they said. So, interesting. All right, let me pull this back up. We can go into a couple more things here.
Yeah, I mean, this is almost done, but trying to remember what we're doing here.
By the mid-19th century, Protestant kabbalistic syncretism began to culminate.
Yeah, it's a lot of
the Christian Zionist cult known as the German Templars.
Yeah, so this is a pietist sect that actually developed they actually moved. Some of them moved to Palestine, and they built some of the waterways and infrastructure that are still being used today, I believe, in Israel. So like they kind of were preparing. They had this idea of like, let's prepare the Holy Land for the return of the Jews. So I guess what I'm showing here is like you really start to see this push to what's now modern Zionism towards the what was this, mid-19th century. So I mean, much earlier than people usually think, where they go back to like, oh, it was all just Derby, like it just came from Derby or whatever.
It was the Lutherans.
Yeah.
It was the Lutherans. Blame Jordan Cooper.
Well, the Lutherans, like, so I've gotten some feedback from like traditional Lutherans on this and stuff, and like their general take is like, well, this stuff had nothing to do with us. The pietists, the Puritans, like they're not traditional Lutherans. So like, it's like, why do I care what happened? They didn't follow Luther's original vision. So that's kind of like what they say, which is fine. I mean, if you're okay with this, then fine. That's not even my argument that this all comes from Luther. So it's like, I'm not really interested in that anyway.
Yeah. My argument is that the LCMS hires rabbis. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Octavian says, give me the scream. All right. I'll give you the scream. There you go. ID Bro sends in another super chat. We was Masons unironically. Also, the other phrase missed was appendant and concordant bodies, i.e. Shriners, Jesters, etc. That's a good point.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that I could have included here. I would have never gotten the articles published. I would still be researching. And so this now gets into
info. You could almost do a whole show on like each section.
I probably will once I get closer to publishing this book. If it ever gets done, I'm still doing it, but it's a lot. You're covering it's very ambitious. I acknowledge that for someone who's never written a book before, to write a comprehensive history covering 500-year span of history and some very complex concepts it's extremely ambitious, and I feel overwhelmed every single day. But
I feel a sense of existential dread every waking moment of my life,
and I wonder why I'm even doing it. But then people keep reminding me that it's important for whatever reason. So it's like, well, I guess I'll keep at it. I mean, I am interested in this, but I will break this down into individual pieces of content. I mean, this stuff we're covering, it's like there's entire volumes of books on each of these things that are being mentioned in passing. So it's like, yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say, you can always release it in volumes too. Like, you don't have to go through the entire history of like every occult practice leading up to a certain point. You could release it in volumes. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, I'm not even going through all the, like, it's not by comprehensive, I mean like more so showing in more detail, like how this all happened.
Yeah.
It's not a whole history of Western esotericism, although
writing an entire encyclopedia.
Yeah. Although I will say, like, if you read scholarly books on Western esotericism, they're mostly focusing on the same figures that were Protestants. So, and so now it's just getting into like what we now know as dispensationalism and kind of the occult roots of that. Oh, you'll find this interesting. Funny enough, the original, like modern, what we now have as like the modern version of dispensationalism was first adapted by a Jesuit it was like literally to subvert Protestants, because they couldn't get Protestants to buy into the idea because it was written by a Jesuit. So the guy's name is he was a Morano, of course. This is another common theme you'll see, is that a lot of these guys were converts from Judaism, whether they became Catholic or Protestant. Mm-hmm. And so this was a converso, Morano, whatever, priest named Manuel Lacunza, who he wrote this book called The Coming of the Messiah in Majesty and Glory. And it played a major role in the Counter-Reformation to diminish the Protestant notion that the Pope was the Antichrist. So it's like now you got Jesuits subverting Protestants who are trying to subvert Catholics. So it's like hilarious what's happening here. The Jesuits were unsuccessful in their several attempts to introduce Lacunza's new futurist system into Protestant eschatology throughout the 19th century, until a Presbyterian pastor named Edward Irving read and translated Lacunza's book, which was written under the pseudonym of Ben Ezra, a converted Jew, to conceal his identity. So think about what's happening here. The Jesuits couldn't get the Protestants to read this and adopt this dispensationalist framework, because they knew it was written by a Catholic. So to get them to pay attention to it, he changed his name to Ben Ezra, a converted Jew. And so the Protestants are like, oh, now it's a former Jew. Now you've got my attention. So like
Interesting.
the levels of subversion here are like comical. So he conceals his identity under this converted Jew, thus taking the heat off Rome and making his own writings more palatable to Protestant readers. Irving's adaptation of Lacunza's Futurism was then introduced to John Nelson Darby, founder of a Moravian sect. So there you go, in Dublin, called the Plymouth Brethren, who further developed the dispensationalist model into a more comprehensive hermeneutic consisting of two distinct comings of Christ. And so this is like what we know now, the secret rapture and all that. And then interestingly, I don't know if I mentioned this here, but Aleister Crowley was a member of Darby's congregation. A key development in Darby's dispensationalism came from Margaret MacDonald, a young Scottish woman who fell ill and experienced, so here you go again, a vision of a pre-tribulation rapture in 1830, which she documented and shared with several Protestant ministers, including Irving. MacDonald was involved in several occult practices, such as charismatic speaking in tongues, automatic writing. That's, for those who don't know, spirit writing. It's like when you summon a demon to write through you physically. Famously, Carl Jung did this. And Joseph Smith too, by the way. There's evidence that Joseph Smith used automatic writing to write the Book of Mormon. And levitation, which Robert Norton wrote of her and a friend. I have seen both her and Miss Margaret MacDonald stand like statues, scarcely to the ground, evidently supernaturally. And then in 1861, a lawyer named Robert Baxter published MacDonald's vision after becoming disillusioned with the Irvingites. Okay, I don't know if I give context of the Irvingites, but this was the early Adventist sect from the founder of the Adventist movement, Charles Miller. So this is where like the Adventists intersect with all this, proving her as the source of Darby's new secret rapture doctrine. Despite the word rapture not appearing anywhere in the Bible in its entirety of church history prior to 1830, the rapture delusion cemented itself into evangelical consciousness as the great American myth. There she is. She was like some kind of artist or something too. So that's the real founder of dispensationalism there. Or at least the rapture, at least like kind of the idea of this pre-trib rapture came to me in a vision. At the core of Darby's dispensationalist theology was the theosophic notion that God requires human agents to advance the second coming. Okay, that's another kabbalistic idea, with their actions depending upon which dispensation of history is in effect. You can also trace this to Joachim of Fiore, who came up with this like kind of dispensationalist model of the eschaton, and he divided it into three for the Trinity, the age of the Spirit, he says, that we're now in. And this was like Joachim of Fiore, I believe, was like 12th century. And he was a huge influence on all these millenarian movements, and including Luther. He even carefully introduced the other theosophic and Masonic synthesis into his translation of the Bible, referring to Jesus as the coming one. And that's from Theosophy, and then God as the grand architect from, as the Masons call him.
Right.
One member of, there's a Crowley reference there. And so he used Darby's model of dispensationalism to develop his concept of the aeons the aeons as developments in the eschaton. And he synthesized it with John Dee's angelic magic. Crowley also coincidentally identified himself as the Antichrist and as a necessary component of God's dispensation of humanity during the final days. And so now it gets into the Adventists. So you have the Adventists, who are a millenarian sect that developed with the emergence of the Millerite cult. This actually, I didn't mention this, but like this gets into the burned over district in New York, where a lot of these Adventist and millenarian cults, including the the Mormons, they have their roots in the same region, which is interesting. So the LDS, the JWs, the Adventists, they all come from the same place.
Mm-hmm. You know what's really interesting? The more radical Reformation sects, all of these newer sects within Protestantism have very explicit occult ties. Seventh Day Adventists, the Moravians, even some of the more modern Reform movement guys have a lot of different occult ties. Now, if we were to go back to the Lutherans, I mean, they could say like the no true Lutheran fallacy. It said like none of these guys were real Lutherans. Any of the ones we don't like, they're not real Lutherans. But it's within the it's within the history of what's been handed down that ends up in today's main lines, basically. The Millerites is like a whole wormhole of information that you can get into. Several different sects branch out from them. Seventh-day Adventists, the Jehovah's Witnesses end up splitting off from the SDAs. Seventh-day Adventism in and of itself is an insane pipeline to go down with their false prophetess and some of her ecstatic visions. The crowning of the fourth commandment in a halo. If you don't do this, basically you're gonna be annihilated. Her push of like veganism, her kind of pseudo-Gnostic dualist view. I mean, just absolute crazy wormhole. I actually did a show on this back in the day when I was a Protestant with Miles from Canon and Creed, because he runs a website called Answering Adventism. So for all the Seventh-day Adventist stuff, he's like the super hyper expert on talking about that subject. It's kind of an interesting show just to bring up.
Yeah. Well, like my thing is, I'm looking at this as like you could use the no true Protestant or no true Lutheran argument. Right. And my kind of like the way that I'm trying to frame this, at least, is that the problem was within the model itself, where it allowed for the Protestantism allowed for this spiritual anarchy to occur.
Yes.
Because of the lack of ecclesiastical guardrails, like because there's no ultimate kind of like consequence for any of this. You can't excommunicate these people. They can just go off and start their own movements. There was no real consequence that they were cut off from the body of Christ, for example. Like there was nothing like that. So it enabled all of this to flourish in a way that we never saw before in human history. And then obviously the printing press played a massive role in that. It allowed that to, it kind of like the way I describe it is never before in human history have heresies been able to be fixed to the text, to the printed text, in a way that they were at the advent of print.
Right.
So, for the first time ever, you had these heresies within the text themselves. They were made permanent.
Right. Yeah. Within the framework itself, it enables them to kind of go off the rails and accept these various different occult ideas into their framework. That's why the one gentleman who asked a question with the super chat earlier, he basically pointed out the entire issue. He said, well, why can't I rely on a Judaic hermeneutic to better understand how to read scripture? Well, that's exactly what they did in lieu of tradition, in lieu of the church's teaching, in lieu of the faith that was handed down, right? To go and find alternative interpretations of these particular verses and so on and so forth. And that, spirals off into infinity, because I mean, infinite delusion. It's
infinite fragmentation too. Like it's just, there's more fragmentation, not less. You're only getting more denominations, not less.
Right. There is nothing to bust up the loggerhead if two opposing views rise up against each other. So ultimately the core issue would be not only like antinomianism, but it would just be the lack of adhering to a cohesive ecclesiology. And also their understanding of church tradition or rejection thereof.
Well,
At least in the objective sense, right? To say that there is like objective truths when it comes to interpretations of scripture.
yeah, and that whole so the whole reason Luther even had to coin the term, or at least like revive the term antinomianism, was because of this dialectical tension that emerged from the doctrine of sola fide. Because you had guys like was it Munster? There was a few at the onset of the Reformation. There was some problems where you had these guys that were essentially abusing the doctrine of sola fide and basically practicing antinomianism. They were doing all this degenerate stuff because they were perceived to be saved upon this kind of like arbitrary confession of, that they received salvation and they're justified by faith. So it's like, it's all washed away anyway. So you have a license to sin. So he coined that term explicitly to address that dialectical tension. But yeah, so, I know we can go on for a while about this, but there was like one other thing that this was leading to involving the Adventists, which was this guy, Charles Taze Russell, who is the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses. He was like the definitive first, actual Christian Zionist. And I did a whole stream on him, and it's like my most popular stream by far to this day. So there's a lot of interest in this guy, I think primarily by former JWs who want to know what the heck is going on with this dude. Cause it was really like mystical guy. He was a Freemason, but denied being a Freemason. He was buried in like a Masonic pyramid that had the cross and crown on it. Yeah. So like really odd guy. He was preaching to, he got a standing ovation from like a crowd of 4,000 Jews that he preached in front of to prepare them for their return to Palestine, stuff like that. So yeah, just interesting guy on a side. If anyone wants to look into that guy, Charles Taze Russell.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I guess we're kind of somebody's saying Jay's audience is coming in. We're about to wrap up here in a moment, so so they'll come in right at the end as we're about to end here. But before we do wrap up, is there any other points that you wanted to address?
I mean, as far as like the work itself goes, I'll just kind of leave it. I think there was a lot that was covered. I know that there's a lot here, and I appreciate anyone that's like interested in this kind of thing. I know it's like you're covering 500 years. So like, there's no way to kind of like summarize this all without it seeming somewhat convoluted. So, yeah, I mean, it's very, people are finding it very interesting, and it's taken me a while to figure out why, but I'm just kind of going with it. It's something people think is valuable to know about. So I continue to cover it over on my channel and on my Substack. But yeah, as far as like that itself goes, not really. I won't get too into the weeds with anything else here.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. This has been really interesting. I'll make sure to link the Substack in the description here. I've already got your channel in the description, so if anybody wants to check that out, they can take a look at his channel, and make sure to go subscribe, Anthony Westgate, and check him out on X. By the way, go and follow him on X. He's got some interesting content on there. I'm trying to grow my X following a bit. It is kind of slow going on that platform, I feel like, for me.
It's I think, I don't know what's going on with the algo these days, but I know that a large reason why my account grew so much, I have like 55K or something, is just because I cover a lot of this stuff and it crosses over into conspiracy territory, which unironically the algorithm promotes. Right. So like I've kind of inadvertently picked up a lot of followers that are like really in the fringes with stuff. And so that was kind of accidental, but it's just because of the nature of the stuff I cover. So like, yeah, you want to really get on the algorithm's good side, you have to get in the conspiracy trend, but then there's like, I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, it's like chaos. Right. It's complete chaos now.
Well, I mean, writing stuff that is more evergreen, right? Like the thread, I think, was a good thing that was put together on my X. But doing like Substacks or like threads or whatever, like Luigi's good about the threads. Orthodox Luigi, he puts a lot of threads together, so maybe I'll just do more of that.
Yeah. Well, that's what inspired me to start my Substack. I was writing a lot of threads, and then people were asking for the content to be more evergreen, because like even if you write a really good thread,
Right.
it's really only being circulated for like 2 days, and then people forget about it. So like that was my way of like making it more evergreen. But even with threads, like I'm convinced that like maybe less than 5% of the people that probably even less than 1% of the people who see any thread are reading the like past like the third post in the thread. It's like it's just the attention span stuff. It's like they're not here for long form. So you have to kind of hijack the algo to like get people to read long form. But yeah. So,
is anyone live that I can send you all to? Somebody let me know who's live right now. Beauty of the Struggle, $20. Thank you so much. Lots of Moravians and these hyper Protestant sects set up shop here in PA. I can't help but wonder if that's why there's so many Judaizing groups here too. There's an actual cult compound off of I-78 called Assemblies of Yahweh.
Yeah. There's the Moravian University. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, I mean that was like kind of their headquarters. They set up shop in PA. Yeah, like I guess like I will say very briefly, because I know we're wrapping up, because I just thought of something. You were like asking if there's anything else. Like many people might wonder, like, why is this even important to know about? Like it seems so detached from like anything that's like within our view, like of being Orthodox Christians, and like that's mostly true. But I think that it really helps us to understand that this is all the spirit of the age that kind of like dominates the Western landscape. Like this is the spread of intellectual history and how it's culminated throughout its centuries of syncretism. And so it's important to kind of like, you don't have to get this deep into it, but it's important to kind of identify where these currents come from.
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually super important to understand the esoteric roots of these various Protestant denominations, because then you'll understand, especially with Masonry, you'll understand some of the things that are going on today. Like a lot of people have no idea what's going on with the Roman Catholic Church today, why they've suddenly had this big shift, why they're teaching religious pluralism, why they're teaching these liberal, it's kind of like liberal ideology, why it seems like they went from like day to night after Vatican II. But if you really trace Masonic subversion and the timeline of Masonic subversion, it makes a lot more sense, especially in the context of things like Operation Gladio and the ties that these Masonic lodges had to even the Vatican Bank. The P2 Lodge Propaganda Due almost bankrupted the Vatican Bank. They had so much influence. They had infiltrated so deep. They had ties to many of the cardinals, so on and so forth. And you forget, I mean, you think, well, they had ties to the cardinals. Well, they didn't, there's no evidence they had like direct influence on the Pope. You forget the cardinals are the next popes, dude. So you influence the cardinals, you're influencing the next papacy. So think about the timeline of that, the Cold War, right? Shortly after World War II, and look at the buildup to the Vatican II reforms, the Vatican II revolution, and look at the people who actually played a role in Vatican II. Father Baum, the Jewish convert, Jewish quote unquote convert to Roman Catholicism.
Another converso.
Right, exactly. Yeah, converted in, did his thing, and left. He was one of the architects of Nostra Aetate. So understanding the esoteric origins of these Protestant denominations and understanding the esoteric origins of Masonry, so on and so forth, and their influence on these various other denominations really helps to understand what is going on today. You had mentioned a name that comes up quite a bit, the Rothschilds, understanding their ties with Kabbalah, which you can kind of just use as it teaches a lot of the same things Masonry does. You said like Masonry is like Judaism for the Gentiles, right? So this is like the Gentile version of kabbalistic kabbalistic teaching, right?
Not that the Rothschilds need something for Gentiles, but yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I was going to say they're big in the promulgation of.
Yes.
And that's all for a very specific purpose, which ultimately, you know, control through ideology.
Yeah, I think it's important to know to a degree, and I think even from an apologetic standpoint, because like I'm not I'm not in the camp that does these apologetics with like LDS and Seventh-day Adventists and stuff like that, by going to the scriptures and disputing over interpretations. I think that's just a dead end. You're not going to get anywhere with that. They're convinced they have the correct interpretation. And then they know that you think you have the correct interpretation. So it's like, you just get nowhere with that. And so I happen to think that, if you can kind of undermine all of that and just bypass having to even dispute over interpretations and show them that this stuff comes from these esoteric currents, that undermines all of that. Like, you can just show them the origins come from, whatever, Kabbalah, Masonry, whatever.
Yep. It certainly helps to know where the ideas come from, and then you can point that out to them. It helps to bridge some gaps. It certainly did for me as a Protestant, researching Masonry's impact in the Protestant Reformation, well, in the American context. So Protestants coming over to America, its major role in American Protestantism was one factor to kind of unraveling that thread for me, because I did a lot of research and I actually taught and did some lectures on this subject when I was a Protestant pastor. So that was always kind of like a worm, a worm in the ear, something that, kind of bugs you. You want to check out later. This is just like a rabbit hole to go down. But anyway, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. This has been fun. Everybody in the comment section, everybody watching the live, go subscribe to Anthony Westgate. Follow him on X. I'll make sure that I put the Substack article in the description. Anything that you want to plug before we wrap up here?
That's pretty much it. Yeah, Substack, YouTube, X. If you don't follow me already, sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. I know this is a little bit out of the ordinary for your stuff, but I think it's good. I'm glad you decided to collab. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Well, hey, thank you all so much for watching. Y'all have a good night.